بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. السلام عليكم.
وعليكم السلام.
Let's go ahead and begin. Okay, so I think we were at the very beginning. We were talking about the four usul al-fiqh. We talked about al-kitab. We talked about the sunnah. And then, of course, we have ijma' and qiyas. I don't have much to discuss in terms of ijma' and qiyas up front. I think everybody knows what ijma' and qiyas are, right? And so we'll get into the details of them as we get into those chapters, inshallah. Let's continue with the reading beyond them. So if one of you two has the book, if you could read, please.
Sheikh, I'll have to step away in a few minutes, so I can read when I come back.
Okay. Zainab, do you have the book?
Yeah, 1 second. Is it from page 33?
I don't actually have the book.
Oh,
But there's a part where
Yeah, khas and am. I think that's where we left off.
okay. بسم الله. تعريف الخاص. فالخاص لفظ وضع لمعنى معلوم أو لمسمى معلوم على الانفراد كقولنا في تخصيص الفرد زيد وفي تخصيص النوع رجل وفي تخصيص الجنس إنسان.
Okay. So the book just goes right into it. So if you notice the page before, it should have some sort of title on it. Like there should be like a page with just a title on it.
Yeah, it
What
says
does it
في
say?
كتاب الله تعالى.
Okay, so what we're doing is we're going through the book is divided into 4 sections. One on the Quran, one on the Sunnah, one on Qiyas, and one on Ijma'. One on Ijma', one on Qiyas. That's the order it goes in. So we're starting with the chapter, or not the chapter, but like the major section of the book, which is Al-Kitab. If you notice, more than 50% of Usul al-Shashi is actually going to be talking about the Quran. And then we get into the Sunnah, and then we get into Ijma', and then we get into Qiyas. Now, the context, yes, this is called the section of Quran, but really what we're discussing and what Usul al-Fiqh is about is language, right? Because we want to understand and interpret meaning. And I don't know if I talked about this last time, but Usul al-Fiqh applies not just to Quran and Sunnah, but Usul al-Fiqh can be applied to anything that is linguistic. When you're reading a book, how do you understand it? When I'm talking to you right now, how do you understand my speech? Anytime you have speech, language going on, Usul al-Fiqh helps us interpret that. It isn't necessarily restricted to Islam and Islamic sources. So everything we're going to learn in this section, this massive section, which we're going to spend more than half the year on Quran, inshallah, will also apply to the Sunnah, and it also applies to things other than Sunnah. For example, the speech of a human being. So if I tell you right now that those of you that do well in class, you will get an A. It's a sentence I just said, right? It's also sort of a promise that I made if I'm the teacher, maybe, that, if you do well, I will give you an A. So when you interpret that speech, that's also Usul al-Fiqh. So that's why a lot of the examples you see are not just going to be Quran. You're going to see examples from the Hadith and Sunnah, and you're also going to see examples from outside of that. When somebody says, I divorce you, or I free the slave, or this will happen if this happens, or I make an oath that this will happen, all of those examples will also be covered, inshallah. And you notice the book just goes straight into this linguistic analysis. So in year 3, we learned words like am and khas and mutlaq and muqayyad and sarih and kinaya and haqiqa and majaz. Now we're going to go through all of those things again, but at a more advanced level, and of course in the Arabic language. So let's go ahead and start with am and khas. What do you guys remember about what am means, what khas means? Forget the book for a second. Let's talk about the concept. Let's make sure we understand the concept. We go through some examples, and then we'll come back to the book, inshallah.
So am meaning general and khas meaning specific, meaning like if there's a hukum that you're deriving off of something, did the Prophet ﷺ mean it in a general sense so that it's applicable to everything, or was it in a specific situation or context, which would be khas, and you can't use that to apply to everything else?
Okay. Zainab, any additions or changes or deletions from that?
No, I
Okay,
don't
so
really know.
right. So why do we care? Why are we trying to classify something into am and khas? What's the point? Why are we studying this?
Yeah, I think it's important in the context of at least even today, where people will take, some a hukum that the Prophet ﷺ intended for a specific person, right, and then apply that to somebody else where it's not relevant to them. Or that's how fatwa work, right? You can't usually apply unless it's a general fatwa. Something and the ulama said to one person. I mean, if you look at this, isn't like from a hukm or shari'i perspective, but when the Prophet ﷺ was approached, um, and for advice, right, and how for one individual, he said, consult your heart, right? Al-birru hahuna, because that was probably a righteous individual. Whereas a corrupt person, you can't do that because they don't have, the sense of intuition that the Prophet ﷺ saw in somebody else.
Okay. Yeah. So we're really like am and the purpose. Oh, we're talking about am and khas, and the purpose of studying am and khas, and same with mutlaq and muqayyad, is that we want to determine the scope. I call it scope. This is a discussion about scope. Does this hukum apply just to men, or does it apply to men and women both? Does this hukum apply to Muslims, or does it apply to Muslims and non-Muslims at the same time? If you're going to free a slave, is it one slave that you have to free, or 10 slaves you have to free? Is it a believing slave that you have to free, or just any slave that you have to free, right? So any part of a sentence that is, well, many parts of the sentence, you can look at word by word, and say, what's the scope of this thing? So let's say I commit a sin, right? And then there's kafara for that. The question becomes, do I have to pay the kafara, or do you have to pay the kafara? And then do I have to free one slave, or do I have to free two slaves? All of these different things that come up. So that's why we talk about am and khas. So having discussed that, can someone give me an example of something that's am and let's get into the Shari'i perspective. Let's get into the fiqh perspective. Something that's am and something that's khas. Not one example? Okay, let's talk about sort of a crude definition before we get into the examples. So for those that have studied set theory in math, am means all of the things in the set. And khas is when you select things from the set. Okay, so am is all of the things, khas is some of the things, specific things that are chosen. So if I say, for example, I have a phone here, I say phones. The word phones, is that am or khas?
Am.
Okay, why is it am?
It's not referring to a specific phone.
It's not referring to a specific phone, but it's not even referring to a specific set of phones. It's referring to, the key there is it's referring to all of the phones. All phones. So when I just use the word phones in the English language, and I make a sentence out of it, and I say, phones are used as a means of communication. Am I talking about a specific set of phones or all of the phones? All of the phones, right? Phones are used for communication. I could also have said all phones are used for communication. It's more explicit, but it means the same thing, right? I'm emphasizing. When I say phones are used for communication, the word phones is am. All phones are used for communication. Again, phones, am. Any phone is used for communication. Any phone can be used for communication. Also, am.
So
Yes.
it's just general.
General, but specifically general as in covering everything.
Okay.
Okay, it's comprehensive, including everything. If I say iPhones, is that am or khas?
That's all.
That's khas, because now no longer am I referring to all phones. I'm referring to only those that, so I look at the set of all the phones and I look at it and say, oh, that's iPhone, that's iPhone. Oh no, that's Android. Okay, so therefore I don't have all of the phones anymore. I have some of the phones, therefore it is khas. Okay. What if I say 3 phones? Is that am or khas?
That's false.
That's khas
Because limitation.
because I've limited it again. Okay. As long as I've limited it and it's not the entire set, it's going to be khas. So I could have said iPhones. I could say 3 phones. I could say my phone, right? I could say blue phones. I could say smartphones. Any of those are methods of declaring something to be khas because they're not all phones. So all phones, any phones, each phone, every phone, and phones. Those are the ways that I say am. Yeah. But the way I say khas is I give something less than that. Now, there are 2 ways of getting to khas. No one's going to teach it to you ever, by the way, this way. I don't know why the books of fiqh make it very complicated, but I'm trying to make this simple. So all, each, any, and then just the word by itself, plural, those are all going to be am. The way you get to khas is one of 2 ways or both. Either you give it a description, a sifa, a characteristic, some sort of a descriptor that says smartphones. Now you know it's not all the phones because the dumb phones are excluded. iPhones, now you know the Androids are excluded. Blue phones, well then the pink ones are excluded, right? My phone, well everything else is excluded. So one way is to give a description. Another way is to give a number. If I say, walk outside and find me 3 phones and bring them back, it's going to be khas because you're going to stop at 3. 3 is a specific number. You're not going to bring back 1. You're not going to do 2. You're not going to do 4. You're going to do 3. 3 out of all of them out there. Now we've restricted it. It's going to be khas. So either you give a description or you give a number or you do both. If I say, go find me 3 iPhones, it's still going to be khas. Zainab, does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Afraz, you there? Does that make sense? You might have had to step away. Okay, so this is very, very important part of the lesson. Like this will be in the exam for sure, because this is like how I want you to understand am and khas. If you don't memorize the definition, I don't care. I don't care if you don't memorize the definition. I want you to be able to apply it. When you're reading the Quran, when you're reading the Hadith, the Sunnah, you need to be able to understand the concepts of am and khas. It doesn't matter if you know the definition or not. I don't care. Okay. So having done one set of examples, let's do another set of examples, and hopefully this is sufficient, inshallah. If I use the word books, Zainab, is that am or khas? Books.
Am.
If I say, I want you to go to the library and find all the books related to usul al-fiqh and bring them back, am I asking for something am or khas?
Khas.
Khas, okay. If I say, I want you to go to the library and get me any 3 books just get me any 3 books. Is that am or khas?
Am.
I said 3 books. Is that all of the books?
No, so that's khas.
That's khas, okay? This is a common mistake. The common mistake is you're like, oh, look, I can get any book, therefore it's am, right? That's how you're thinking. It's like, no, I asked for 3. Since I'm asking for 3, it's going to be khas.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and discuss the next concept, which isn't going to come until the next chapter. But let's go ahead and discuss it because it's related. And this concept is the concept of mutlaq and muqayyad. So what does mutlaq mean? What does muqayyad mean? Like just from a linguistic perspective, if you remember.
Restricted and unrestricted.
Yeah, so mutlaq is like, you could say unrestricted, unconditional, absolute, right? So mutlaq is that thing. Remember I said there's 2 ways to get to khas. One is you either give it a description or you give it a number, a quantity, okay? Or you do both at the same time. If there is a description attached to something, that description is what makes it muqayyad, not the quantity. The description makes it muqayyad. So, because if I say blue phones, that now just became muqayyad because they can only be blue. There's a description. There's a restriction, a condition, a description, whatever you want to call it. Okay. If I say 3 phones, it's still mutlaq because it can be any phone. Okay. So the way to think about it is you take a word, you either divide it into am or you divide it into khas. Actually, there's a third category, which is mushtaq, which we'll get to later, inshallah, right? But let's just start with am and khas. You take a word, it's either am or khas. Within khas, there's 2 categories, mutlaq or muqayyad. So if it has a description, an adjective or something like that, it's going to be muqayyad. And if it doesn't, it's going to be mutlaq. Okay? So let's do this again. 3 phones. Am or khas? Zainab.
Khas.
Mutlaq or muqayyad?
مطلق.
Jazakallah khair. Zian, we're going to do a book.
نعم. Oh, it's false. Because we think this was
All I said is a book.
that's
It's am. Any difference of opinion? How do you translate a book into Arabic? Kitabun. Okay. Kitabun is how many books?
one book.
1 book. How do you know it's 1 book? It's mufrad. Yeah. There's no musanna, there's no jama'. It's kitabun. And it's not al-kitab. It's not the book. It's a book. Okay. So it's not the same as like any book. It's not any book. It's a book. Kitabun wahidun, right? When we learned our mansubat in Nahu, we learned this concept of tamyizul adad, right? And then we learned like, how do I say 1 book? How do you say 1 book? You say kitabun. Now, if you really want to do ta'keed and you want to emphasize it, you could say kitabun wahidun. You could, but that's not how, unless you're trying to emphasize the point, you don't say 1 book. You just say book. In Arabic, so kitabun. So it's kitabun, am or khas?
False.
Because it's referring to 1 book. Yeah? 1 book. This is important to remember. I tricked you there. Okay. Is that mutlaq or muqayyad? Why?
Is it limitation?
No, the quantity has nothing to do with mutlaq and muqayyad. The quantity doesn't have an impact on that. Only the adjective, the description. If I say blue book, that makes it muqayyad. If I say usul al-fiqh book, that makes it muqayyad. Okay? Not otherwise it's mutlaq. Just book is mutlaq. Okay? Any questions so far? Fraz, I think you need to be tested too. Okay, so sometimes in the Quran, Allah talks about kafara and He says you have to free. So Allah says sometimes, فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ. What does that mean? فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ. What's the kafala?
Isn't that the kafar, like this to free a slave? Or is this referring to something else?
To free a slave. Okay. So sometimes Allah says فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ, right? Okay. So فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ. The word رَقَبَةٍ. عام or khas?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Zainab.
عام.
عام. Okay. So Allah is telling us to free all of the slaves in the world? How many slaves
No.
are we supposed to free? One? Okay. Why? Well, how do we know it's one? Raqabatin, yeah. So it's by default raqabatin wahidatin, right? Because wahida is built into it. We know that the mufrad for, we know that the tamyizul adad, the quantification, how do you translate tamyizul adad? The quantity of an object is built into the word when it's mufrad or when it's musanna, right? If I say kitabani or kitabaini, you don't ask me how many books are you talking about. You know it's two because it's built into the word. So similarly, if I say kitabun or raqabatun, the word raqabatun means a slave, right? But the problem is we often translate it as a slave. But think about it. Another translation is one slave. Okay? Because a slave means one slave. And if it's one slave, I've given you a quantity. It's no longer am, is going to be khas. Because I'm not asking you to free all of the slaves. If I ask you to free all of the slaves, then you could say it's am. Does that make sense, Zainab, or is that confusing?
No, that makes sense.
Okay. So, so it means you freed one slave. Now, is that mutlaq or muqayyad? Also a question for you, Zainab.
مطلق.
Okay. Why is it mutlaq?
There's no description.
There's no description attached to it. I can pick any slave in the world, any one, and free them, right? It doesn't matter what kind of slave they are or anything like that. Okay, Afraz. Sometimes in the Quran, Allah says, فَتَحْرِيرُ رَقَبَةٍ مُؤْمِنَةٍ. Is that am or khas?
That feels khas because it's adding more restrictions.
Okay, what if it was just raqaba? That was also khas. So there is, yeah. It was khas to be, like it was khas even with raqaba. Now we're adding mu'mina. So is that mutlaq or muqayyad?
That'll be muqayyad.
It'll be muqayyad, why?
It's another restriction.
It's another restriction. So again, I start with a set. My set is all of the things. All of the things would be all of the slaves. So I'm starting with all of the slaves in the world. And from that, I'm going to be like, okay, I'm supposed to select one. So I can like, well, which one do I select, right? But not only that, Allah further restricted and said, raqaba mu'mina. So, oh, this one's like Muslim, this one's not Muslim, this one's, oh, I can select this one because they're Muslim. So I can select even fewer. But the fact that I have to select one in the first place makes it khas. But the fact that I have to select a believing slave makes it muqayyad on top of that, right? Because khas can be mutlaq or khas can be muqayyad. But anytime I go from all to less than all, it's going to be khas. So don't get thrown off. Don't be like, oh, but that's like, you know, it's kitabun. Like, no, kitabun is still one book. Even if it's 10 books, even if it's 100 books, it's still going to be khas because I've restricted it somehow instead of all. Any questions on this so far?
Sheikh, one thing, so I think I brought this up last time, which is just like there's overlap sometimes between categories, right? And so sometimes it's a little confusing. So when we're talking about khas versus am versus mutlaq versus muqayyad, I think mutlaq and muqayyad makes sense. For khas versus am, is it purely a quantitative scope thing like you were defining it in terms of like all the slaves versus one slave? Because the way that I'm thinking about it is when you say for tahrir raqaba, is it talking about your slave? Is it talking about somebody else? Like anybody's slave? Is that like a khas am thing or a mutlaq muqayyad thing?
Yeah. So in the terminology of am, khas, mutlaq, and muqayyad, there is no overlap. A word is either am or it's khas.
Okay.
The reason it's going to be am is if you're referring to all of that type of object. Am can only be everything all at the same time.
But when we're saying everything, you're talking about quantitatively. Like you're not talking about like whether it's your slave or somebody else's.
Forget the yours or somebody else's. It literally means all, right? It literally just means all. Am is like literally all, whether it's quantitative or qualitative or any other thing, it just means all. So when I say slaves, it means every slave in the world. All slaves is am. Any slaves is am. Each slave is am. Slaves is am. But when I say 3 slaves or believing slaves, it becomes khas. No matter what I've done to get it to less than all, that's khas. So it's either am or it's khas. Within khas, if there was a quantity specified only, then it's, or if there's only quantity specified, it's going to be mutlaq. If there's a description specified, let me say it differently. If there's no description specified, it's going to be mutlaq. If there is some description specified, it's going to be muqayyad. So when you draw a tree, it's am, khas, under khas, mutlaq, muqayyad. So as soon as you see a description like black phones, you know it's muqayyad. If I just say 2 phones, it's mutlaq because there's no specific description. If I say 2 black phones, again, because there's a description, it's going to be muqayyad.
Makes sense. So, I mean, it sounds like you're saying am khas does have to do primarily with quantity. Am is everything of that type, versus khas is a specific
The
number.
reason I don't want to say quantity is because there's 2 ways of getting the khas, and one of them is descriptor. So if you're thinking about it as a set of all things, which is n, size n, right? Anytime you remove even one item from the set and you leave the rest, or you pick one, anything where you're doing less than that, that's just going to be khas. That's all.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So to you, I see why you might look at that as quantity. If that's how you think about it, that's fine. I don't care. I don't care how you actually think about it, as long as you can understand and apply the concept.
But yeah, I guess what I'm struggling is like maybe it's my just framework of thinking about it. Like, if you're not defining it as quantity, how else are you defining it? Because what you just said was anything less than the whole.
Because we're not counting.
So you're okay.
I'm not sitting here and counting. Like to quantify something means you have to enumerate it. That's
Okay.
what quantification means. I'm being very like.
The
Huh?
semantics of the word, but you're saying basically either whole or part. You're not saying specific.
Correct. That's exactly right. I'm staying away from quantification because I can apply these concepts without knowing the quantity. Right? I don't have to know how many slaves there are in the world. I don't know. It doesn't matter. I can apply these concepts regardless. Right? So this is okay. So that's the idea here. Yeah, that's the word that's coming to mind. I'm not being pedantic. I am being technically accurate. One of my colleagues told me technically accurate is the best kind of accurate. So I'm gonna stick to the best kind of accurate. Okay. Okay. So remind me, you read the definition of khas, right? Okay. Al-khassu lafzun wudi'a li ma'nan ma'lumin aw li musamman ma'lumin ala infirad, right? Okay. So the khas is a word. Okay, we know that. It's a lafzun. وضع لمعنى معلوم. Now this is important because وضع لمعنى, like, it just means that it was put in place for a meaning. So words that don't have meaning get taken out of this. Okay. If I just say like, okay, that's not a word, right? It's just a sound, or there's sometimes useless words that have no meaning. We study that in Nahu where we have lafz and mu'mal and all this stuff. Okay, we take out that stuff. Ma'lumin, the reason it's mentioned that the meaning must be known is because I said earlier, and I hinted at this, there's am, there's khas, and then there's a third type of thing, which is called mushtarak. Mushtarak is a word where you don't know which meaning we're talking about. But here we know what meaning we're talking about. So we'll get to mushtarak later, inshallah. But just so we know, there's am, and the same line, there's khas, and there's mushtarak. So you're either am, or you're khas, or you're mushtarak. You can't be in, there's no overlap. You're in one of those 3 categories. Okay. So the meaning is known. You know what the meaning means. And then ala al-infirad is just saying, I don't really like how this translates, but let's just say it's trying to separate, like it's trying to isolate or separate or take a subset of all of the things. Okay, that's what khas is. Now, khas can apply to different, like depends on the context, okay? So if I use the word man, the word man always going to be khas. I guess the word man is always khas, right? You can't think of a context where it might be am. So the word ziyan, that's going to be khas. Why? Because of all of the people I could have selected, I picked one. And I picked one, and I'm saying ziyan. Now, I mean this one over here, okay? So if I mean this one, it's again a way of describing. It's muqayyad, right? It's muqayyad because I'm saying this ziyan over here. Like I don't literally say that. I just say like, ziyan, answer my question. If I say that, everyone knows who I'm talking about, right? You know there's only one ziyan in class. There might be others in the world, right? But there's one in class. I'm looking at him. I'm asking him a question. He doesn't go and say like, I'm sorry, your speech is not clear. Is that am or khas? Are you talking to me or some other ziyan in the world, right? Like he knows I'm talking to him. So it's very clear. When a name is used, the name is like khas, okay? Don't like get into like, oh, but there's other ziyans in the world. Yeah, I'm talking about this one. Come on. It's not about getting all technical about it. It's about trying to understand, what do I mean? We just want to understand, what does Allah mean? When he says tahriru raqaba, it means one thing. When he says tahriru raqabatin mu'mina, it means another thing. And by the way, you might be thinking here going like, oh, but Sheikh Omar, that's kind of obvious. Like, why are we talking about this? This one's a slave, so I can pick any slave. This one is a believing slave. So I have to pick a believing slave, right? Does that seem kind of obvious to you? When you read the Quran, some places it says raqaba, some places it says raqaba mu'mina. Does that seem obvious or no?
Necessarily.
What's that?
Does it have to be believing that it's not that explicit? Like it's not that obvious?
No, in one place it says raqaba. So what do you think? What kind of slave is that? There's no mu'mina. It's just raqaba.
So I wouldn't restrict it to believing slave.
You would not restrict it to believing, right? That seems obvious to you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, the Shafi'i said, no, it has to be believing slave. So what seems obvious to Hanafis in this case is like, hey, listen, it's Allah. It's his speech is precise and clear. And here it says raqabatin mu'mina, and here it says raqaba. Raqabatin mu'mina is raqabatin mu'mina, believing slave. Here it says raqaba. That's any slave. The Shafi'is say, no, that's also a believing slave. Okay, so because they do a certain type of, we'll get to that, inshallah, we'll get to that. But the basic idea is that they took one part of the Quran and they applied it to another part of the Quran. And the Hanafis are like, oh my God, what are you guys doing? You took something that was mutlaq and you made it muqayyad. How can you take something Allah made it mutlaq, you made it muqayyad? When Allah makes it mutlaq, how can you make it muqayyad? Hanafis have a cow about it, right? So that's why we're spending some time on this, because there are differences of opinion that arise. Okay, so Zayd is specific. When I say man is specific because it's different than, it excludes the women, right? So if I go with the jins, which is humans, and I say man, you automatically know it doesn't include a woman. And also if I say human itself is a jins, it's a jins, but it's also khas because I'm saying human versus, like I could have said, a living being, right? Living being could have included an animal. So it depends on the context you're talking about, right? So if the context that we were talking about was electronic devices, that was the set. And then I said phones, okay? The phones are going to be a khas from the electronic devices. If I'm talking about phones, and I talk about iPhones, phones itself is am, and the iPhones is khas. So it depends on what context I'm thinking about and what is the discussion we're trying to have. We're sitting there, we're looking at the Quran, we're talking about raqaba and raqaba mu'mina. Okay, we don't need to talk about the non-raqaba. We don't need to talk about that. Raqaba itself is the am. Okay, all the raqabas in the world, that's the am. That's the context we're talking about. We don't need to worry about like, oh wait, Raqaba is a category from humans. Humans are a category from living things. Living things are a category of all things. Things are a category of creation. Look, okay, stop. We're talking about slaves. That's what we're talking about. So the am and khas is context specific as well. Okay, just want to point that out. Books are a type of thing as well, right? So you have to, so when I say books, the example I'm giving is books is am. Okay, any book, all books, it's am. Okay. So it's either, then we say, so it's a known meaning, or limusamma ma'lum, because the reason I say musamma in the definition is because Zayd is a name. So I either say phone, a phone, black phone, etc., or I could just name it. I could say, you know, Umar's phone. That's what my phone's called. Or I could just say Zayd. So it's known by name. It could be known by description. It could be known by name, whatever. Okay. Any questions before we move on? Okay, let's move on. You can read, please.
تعريف العام والعام كل لفظ ينتظم جمعا من الأفراد إما لفظا كقولنا مسلمون ومشركون وإما معنى كقولنا من وما.
Okay. So similarly, we have a definition for عام. والعام كل لفظ ينتظم جمعا من الأفراد إما لفظا كقولنا مسلمون ومشركون وإما معنى كقول من. Okay. The book has the author has a mistake in the book. Okay. What does the word Muslimun mean? It's not a trick question.
مسلم.
It means what?
Muslim men.
Is it only Muslim men? What if I have 3 Muslim men and 1 Muslim woman? What would I call them?
Muslimun.
Muslimun. Okay. Correct. But what is Muslimun like? Muslims, right? It means like in English it would be translated Muslims.
Yeah.
How many Muslims is it referring to?
It's not referring to a number.
Okay. Any other opinions? For those that have really studied Nahu, maybe it's in a book like this one. I don't know if it is. I actually have never studied Hidayatul Nahu, so I wouldn't know. What's the difference between Muslimun and Al-Muslimun? Ma'rifa nakira. But what is the meaning of Muslimun and what is the meaning of Al-Muslimun?
Muslim could be in general, in anyone, the Muslim, referring to a specific person.
No, it's Muslimun, right? It's all plural.
Oh, it's Muslim.
Yeah.
Oh.
It's Jama Muzakkar Salim.
Oh.
I don't know this book. Have you guys studied this yet? Oh, okay. But you guys have done like Saniya or something like that? Okay. Anyone know the difference between Muslimun and Al-Muslimun? No? Yes, it's Ma'rifa Nakira, but what does it mean to the meaning? Okay. Al-Muslimun refers to all of the Muslims. Al-Muslimun. Muslimun does not refer to all of the Muslims. It's a Jama'atilla. Okay, it's a smaller number, like maybe it's like 5, 10, something like that. So if I say, you know, I was at my house, some Muslimun came over, that would be fine. Okay, that would be Muslimun came over, because it's a smaller number. If I say I was at my house, Al-Muslimun came over, that would be a mistake, because not all of the Muslims in the world came over to my house. Unless I was talking about, you know, see, the word Al-Muslimun can have 2 meanings, right? Because it can also be ma'rifah. So I can say, I'm I can say I was at the university, and then the Muslims over there started, after they read the news, they started crying. I would say al-Muslimuna, but I'm not referring to all al-Muslimuna hunak, right? All the Muslims over there. I'm not referring to all of the Muslims in the world, but I'm talking about a specific context. But so the word al-Muslimun can represent the jinns, like all of the Muslims in the world, or I could be talking about it in a specific context, and you can figure that out from the context. So the word al-Muslimun can have two meanings, but Muslimun for sure cannot be referring to all of the Muslims in the world. That is a grammatical mistake that Imam al-Shashi made in the book. And so if you want to correct the book, you can change كَقَوْلِنَا الْمُسْلِمُونَ وَالْمُشْرِكُونَ. If you want to correct the text itself, that would be the way to do it. Okay. So وَالْعَامُ كُلُّ لَفْظٍ يَنْتَزِمُ جَمْعًا. So it's all the words that are, plural, min al-afradi. It's like all of the things. إِمَّا لَفْظًا, so it could either be a word, a concept, كَقَوْلِنَا الْمُسْلِمُونَ وَالْمُشْرِكُونَ, وَإِمَّا مَعْنًا, or a meaning, like when we say man wa ma. So I say the word man, right, is used in the context of, for example, man man jahada فأسلم, or whatever, فنجح, right, or whatever. Like whoever works hard, they're gonna succeed. Okay, so man, when used in the context of whoever, is going to be ham. The word ma, when used in the context of whatever, is going to be am. So remember earlier I said each phone, or any phone, or all phones. You can also say like whoever does this is going to be successful. Whatever it is you think you know, you don't, right? It's like all of the things. So anytime you use a word like that, those words are going to be ham. Okay? Because it's referring to all of the things.
Sheikh, just so I can make sure I heard you correctly, you're saying anytime man and ma is used as am. There's no they're specific.
If I ask you man anta, what does that mean?
Who are you specifically?
Who are you, right? But then I say man fa'ala dhalik, whoever does that, they will be successful, right? The word man has many meanings that it can be used in. Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of the meanings that it's used in is in the meaning of whoever. Like even in the Quran, when the people of Ibrahim alayhi salam, they say man fa'ala hadha bi alihatina, right? That's referring to one person. They're not referring to all of the people. It's whenever it's used in the context of whoever. Okay, and the word ma, it is going to be am when it's used in the concept of whichever or whatever, something like that. Okay. Let's give an example. Yeah, I'm struggling with an example, but these examples are not that hard to find. Okay, let's continue, please.
حكم الخاص من الكتاب وحكم الخاص من الكتاب وجوب العمل به لا محالة، فإن قابله خبر الواحد أو القياس فإن أمكن الجمع بينهما بدون تغير في حكم الخاص يعمل بهما، وإلا يعمل بالكتاب ويترك ما يقابله.
Okay, so we're saying the ruling of the khas, and it's going to be the same as the am actually, by the way, is that it's wajib to act upon it. That whatever is specified as khas, we're going to act upon it. No matter what, you act upon it. Now, so what happens if you have something that's khas in the Quran, and then you have something that comes to you that opposes it, فَإِنْ قَابَلَهُ, that is khabar wahid or qiyas or something else like that. It's like a isolated hadith, or it's from qiyas, it's from opinion. What do you do? What do you prefer? It's not a trick question. You have something that's khas in the Quran, it's definitive, right? If Allah said something, He said it in a definitive sense, it has a definitive meaning, and it's in the Quran. So something opposes it, like your own opinion through ijtihad, through qiyas, whatever, it's a different opinion, you're going to pick the Quran. Why? Because the Quran is the ultimate authority. Is the ultimate. There's no doubt about that. And if something comes to you through a hadith that's isolated, you're going to do the same thing. You're going to pick the Quran. So the basic idea here is the Quran is the strongest of evidences, and therefore you're going to pick the Quran over isolated ahadith that contradict it, or isolated opinions or ijtihad or whatever you might have. Obviously, whatever Allah said, He said it for a reason, right? And He said it definitively. It's like, you can't just be like, oh yeah, He said it, but He didn't mean it. No, Allah said it in the Quran. It's khas. It has to be khas. Okay? Okay, so you would discard what is opposing it and you would take what's in the Quran. Okay, continue, please.
مثاله في قوله تعالى يتربصن بأنفسهن ثلاثة قروء فإن لفظه الثلاث خاص في تعريف
إن لفظته.
فإن لفظة الثلاث خاص في تعريف عدد معلوم فيجب العمل به.
Okay, so the example that's given is in the Quran. Allah says that the waiting period, the iddah, after the divorce is going to be, like we know there's many different iddahs. Specifically, the one that we're talking about is the one that's ثلاثة قروء. And the word quru is plural of which word? Qur. Right, so we have qur, and here we're talking about 3 qurus. Okay, what's a qur? What does ثلاثة قروء mean? We know this and we don't want to talk about it, or we don't know it? Yeah, go ahead.
Is it referring to tahara?
Okay, so one opinion is referring to tahara.
Isn't it like cycles for women?
Cycles. Okay, so is it hayd? Is it tuhur? Okay, so let's just talk about cycles, right? Without getting into the complications of the menstrual cycle. There's a cycle, which is called hayd, and there's a period of purity, which is called tuhur. And there's hayd, then there's tuhur, then there's hayd, then there's tuhur, right? That's how it works. Let's not talk about the people who don't have cycles because they are not mature enough yet, or they have reached menopause, or they're pregnant, or whatever. Let's just talk about the average person. Cycle happens, period of purity. Then there's cycle, purity, cycle, purity, cycle, purity. Okay? So far, so good? So what's a qur? What does that have to do with hayd and tuhur? Okay, so this is where the difference of opinion comes. Okay, the Hanafis say a qur is one of those menstrual cycles. If I go through one cycle, a second cycle, and a third cycle, and the iddah is over. The Shafi'is say it's the period of tuhur. So I go through a tuhur, a second tuhur, and a third tuhur, and The iddah is over. Okay. Is a sunnah divorce given during menstruation or outside of menstruation?
Outside.
Outside, right? So a sunnah divorce, the best kind of divorce, if there's, yeah, the best form of giving divorce would be to do it during a period of tuhur. So let's say you're Shafi'i, right? So I give the divorce. It's during tuhur. Then I wait for hayd. Then I have a second tuhur, right? Then I have a hayd. Then have a third tuhur, and iddah is over. With me so far? How many haids took place during that time?
Two.
2 haids took place. Okay. How many tuhurs took place?
3.
Not exactly. Because I could not possibly have divorced like the second the woman was in puberty. So 2 and some, right? More than 2, greater than 2, less than 3. Maybe it's 2.7, 2.5, 2.3, 2.1, but it's not 3. Yeah. The Hanafis will say, okay, we're in the period of tuhur. This is where the divorce is given. We do hayd, tuhur, hayd, tuhur, hayd. Iddah is over. Okay. How many haids were there? 3. How many tuhurs were there? 2 and a bit again. Okay. 2 and something. So whose iddah ends earlier, the Shafi'is or the Hanafis?
The Hanafis, because they only have 2.
No, the Shafi'is are always going to end early because they're only caring about the tuhur. Tuhur 1, or the first one that was not even complete, the second one, and the third one. The Hanafis are going to wait till the hayd after that and finish then. Yeah. So the Shafi'is are always going to finish early. Now, the question becomes the word qur, what does it mean? Well, qur, linguistically, the word qur can mean hayd or it can mean tuhur. Sometimes you have this in Arabic, right? It can mean this or it can mean that. So the word qur can mean hayd and it can also mean tuhur. So are we supposed to do 3 tuhurs or 3 haids? This is the difference of opinion. The Shafi'is say 3 tuhurs. The Hanafis say 3 haids. Okay. And the Hanafis and Shafi'is then, obviously go back and forth. You're wrong. No, you're wrong. Here's why. This is our opinion. This is what's going on. And they have this discussion back and forth. And they have like all these like weird discussions, like the Shafi'is will make a point that, it's thalathata quru, and the word qur is, masculine, and the word tuhur is masculine as well. So, that's why it matters. I mean, it's like, sometimes the debates are like really silly. It's like, so what? It's not the word tuhur. But then there's actually some like better arguments. So that one of the Hanafi arguments is that Allah says thalathata quru. The word thalathata, is that am or khas?
Us, specific.
Khas, right? It's 3. So when it's 3, it's definitively 3. Should you be doing more than 3 or less than 3? No, you shouldn't. Right? Allah told us 3. So it has to be exactly 3. Well, Shafi'is, if you're going to follow the tuhur concept, you didn't get to exactly 3. You got to like 2 and a fraction, right? Because you gave divorce in this period of tuhur, but you didn't give divorce at the exact second or millisecond that the tuhur started. Therefore, you got 2 and a fraction. 2 and a fraction is not 3. You can't just round up. That's not 3. The Hanafis, if you pick hayd, it's always going to be 3. So that's one of the arguments. There's a million arguments back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Okay. But one of the arguments that the Hanafis use is the word 3 is khas, which means it must be followed. And if you're going to follow it, the word hayd allows you to have 3 complete haids, whereas the word tuhur would not give you 3 complete tuhurs. Do you follow the argument?
Can you repeat that, Sheikh?
Huh? Yeah, so the Shafi'is, if you follow the Shafi'i method, I gave the divorce in this tuhur, right? So I didn't capture the whole tuhur, I caught a fraction of it. Then we have hayd, then we have another tuhur, then we have hayd, then we have another tuhur. So I didn't get 3 tuhurs, I only got 2 and a fraction. 2 7/8 or 2 6/9 or whatever it was, right? And so the argument is like, hey, Allah said 3, you should be doing 3. But you guys are doing something less than 3. So you guys are wrong. That's the argument. Okay, any questions? So sometimes you can use these concepts of am and khas to, like, you know, create academic arguments. And that's the example over here. Okay, so فإن لفظة الثلاثة, the word ثلاثة خاص في تعريف عدد معلوم فيجب العمل به. Okay, continue.
Shall I read the example? مذهب الإمام الشافعي.
Yeah.
مذهب الإمام الشافعي ولو حمل الأقراء على الأطهار كما ذهب إليه الشافعي رحمه الله باعتبار أن الطهر مذكر دون الحيض وقد ورد الكتاب في الجمع بلفظة التأنيث دل على أنه جمع المذكر وهو الطهر لزم ترك العمل بهذا الخاص لأن من حمله على الطهر لا يوجب 3 أطهار بل طهرين وبعض الثالث وهو الذي وقع فيه الطلاق.
Okay, so is it like, this is the thing, right? What happens is sometimes in the Hanafi books, they're going to bring the weaker of the Shafi'i arguments and then they're going to destroy them. Sometimes they don't bring the stronger Shafi'i arguments. It's not really fair. But one of the weaker arguments is, so the word ثلاثة قروء, right? What does quru mean linguistically? Qur mean linguistically? I don't know how to translate it linguistically. Let's see. Menstruation. That's how it says. But I mean, the problem is it refers to both. Okay. Okay. So the word qur, is it male or female? It's male, and so that's what they're presenting the Shafi'i argument that the word tuhur is also male, and therefore it would count because the word hayd is female, and therefore it wouldn't count. That's not the strongest Shafi'i argument, but anyway, so it's saying like لو دل على أنه جمع المذكر وهو الطهر لازم ترك العمل بهذا الخاص لأن من حمله على الطهر لا يجب 3 أطهار. So it's saying, what's saying is لا يجب 3 أطهار بل طهرين وبعد الثالث. That's what I was explaining, that if you follow the Shafi'i opinion, you're going to end up with 2 and some of a third. وهو الذي وقع فيه الطلاق. And that was the one in which the talaq had taken place, right? The original tuhur was not a complete tuhur because that was the one in which the talaq took place. And then you have 2 more tuhur. So you have a fraction of one and 2 others. Okay, continue.
فيخرج على هذا حكم الرجعة في الحيضة الثالثة وزواله وتصحيح نكاح الغير وإبطاله وحكم الحبس والإطلاق والمسكن والإنفاق والخلع والطلاق وتزوج الزوج بأختها و4 سواها وأحكام الميراث مع كثرة تعدادها.
Okay, so now because the iddah of the Hanafis ends up being different than the iddah of the Shafi'is, we see how, like, practically speaking, this has 2 different implications. One of the iddahs is going to end early and the other one is going to end later, right? This impacts so many things. The point we're trying to make here is, oh wow, this difference of opinion results in a variety of practical implications. These are practical things that happens. So hukm raj'ati, which means that the ability so a man gives a divorce, he says, I divorce you, right? He has to take her back within that iddah period. If he wants to take her back, it's talaq raj'i by default. If I just say I divorce you, it's going to be talaq raj'i by default. I can take her back. But for the Shafi'is, you have a shorter period in which you have to take her back than the Hanafis. Yes. So once that 3rd tuhur ends, you can't take her back. Whereas for the Hanafis, you have another few days, another haid that you can go through where you can take her back, right? So there's a little bit of extra time. So حكم الرجعة في الحيضة الثالثة, right? So this is the third haid because the first tuhur, there's no difference of opinion. The first haid, there's no difference of opinion. Second tuhur, no difference of opinion. Second haid, no difference of opinion. Third tuhur, no difference of opinion. It's the third haid where that's the time period which the Hanafis got extra, but the Shafis didn't get. Yes? So in that time period, you still have time for the Hanafis to revoke the divorce. Issue number two. Issue number two is وَتَصْحِيحِ نِكَاحِ الْغَيْرِ وَإِبْطَالِهِ, is the ability for that woman to get married to another man. According to the Hanafis, she cannot do that in that third hayd. According to the Shafi'is, she can. Okay. The next issue is وَحُكْمُ الْحَبْسِ. So this is like her, having like a house to stay in because you're supposed to provide second, right? During the period, during the iddah period. وَالْإِطْلَاقِ, okay. وَالْمَسْكَنِ وَالْإِنْفَاقِ. Also like nafaqa, does she continue to get nafaqa or does she not get nafaqa? وَالْخُلْعِ وَالطَّلَاقِ. Can she be trying to negotiate a khul'? Can she get another divorce? Right? If that iddah has ended, then the marriage is ended. There's no like second divorce at that point. وَتَزَوَّجِ الزَّوْجِ بِأُخْتِهَا. Okay, can the husband go marry her sister during those few days? Right? According to the Hanafis, he cannot. According to the Shafis, he can because his marriage is ended. وَأَرْبَعِ سِوَاهَا. Can he have now, other than her, 4 wives? Right? Because you can't have 5 wives at the same time. So again, according to the Hanafis, he has to wait a little bit longer before he can have a 4th wife other than her. وَأَحْكَامُ الْمِيرَاثِ. Is she going to be part of the inheritance or is she not going to be part of the inheritance? مَعَ كَثْرَةِ تَعْدَادِهَا. And with all of the rulings that come from inheritance, right? There's all the complications that come with inheritance. So a lot of these differences of opinion are going to happen when somebody gets a divorce and they're in that waiting period, and then one of these things happens, like she goes and marries another man, or he goes and marries her sister, or all of this stuff during that third hayd, because there's going to be a difference of opinion. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break and then we'll resume after that, inshallah. Okay, Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. The goal today is to get through khas, inshallah. And we can leave Am for next time, inshallah. Okay, so let's continue with كذلك قوله تعالى.
وكذلك sorry.
Yeah, continue.
وكذلك قوله تعالى قد علمنا ما فرضنا عليهم في أزواجهم خاص في التقدير الشرعي.
Okay. So in the verse in the Quran where Allah says, we know what we have قد علمنا ما فرضنا عليهم في أزواجهم. Regarding their wives, we know what we have made fard upon them, right? So كذلك قوله تعالى قد علمنا ما فرضنا عليهم في أزواجهم خاص في التقدير الشرعي فلا يترك العمل به باعتبار أنه عقد مالي. Okay, so the question becomes, yeah, can you just go ahead and read? Just read all the way up to, yeah, where do I want you to read up to? Read all the way up to قابلا للفسخ بالخلع.
Okay. مذهب الإمام الشافعي فلا يترك العمل به باعتبار أنه عقد مالي فيعتبر بالعقود المالية فيكون تقدير المال فيه موكولا إلى رأي الزوجين كما ذكره الشافعي رحمه الله تعالى. تفريعات الإمام الشافعي وفرع على هذا أن التخلي لنفل العبادة أفضل من الاشتغال بالنكاح وأباح إبطاله بالطلاق كيفما يشاء الزوج من جمع وتفريق وأباح إرسال الثلاث جملة واحدة وجعل عقد النكاح قابلا للفسخ بالخلع.
Okay, so Allah says in the Quran قد علمنا ما فرضنا عليهم في أزواجهم. What we have, from this example in Surah Baqarah, no, this is not Surah Baqarah, this is قد علمنا ما فرضنا Surah Ahzab, I think. Surah Al-Ahzab, right? So from this verse, the word faradna is khas. So the way that the Hanafis take from this is that the mahar is something that is stipulated. Like the mahar is something that has to be specified. And that there has to be some amount that is specified. And so, whereas the Shafis, they don't follow that. Okay. Now, what the Hanafis say is that the amount itself is not given by Allah, right? So we can negotiate whatever amount we want. Like the mahar can be whatever amount that we want. However, there's an absolute minimum. And the absolute minimum we know for the Hanafis is equal to 10 dirhams, right? The 10 dirhams is the absolute minimum that is set for the mahar. Now, interestingly enough, also, so the Hanafis say there's a it's very interesting. The Hanafis have a concept of marriage that is that marriage, there is a transaction, there's a contract, there's an aqd involved, but also it's an act of ibadah that is more than just an aqd. And that is why it's not like any other regular financial contract. So if you look at Kitab al-Buyu' and you look at Kitab al-Nikah, you look at the chapter of sales and transactions, and you look at the chapter of Nikah, you're going to find that there are some overlaps and there are some differences. The overlaps is, in terms of there's certain things that are necessary in terms of a contract to be valid, for it not to be fasid, for it not to be batil, for it not to be, there's a number of conditions that are specified. And that's where you find that there's overlap between sales and marriages. There is a contract involved. However, the Hanafis take it to be something more meaningful than that. The Shafi'is look at it as just a financial transaction. As in, the marriage is like a financial transaction. And in any other financial transaction, there's this concept of you can have musawama. Musawama meaning you have negotiation and bargaining. So you can set whatever price you want. You can set to the mahar to whatever you want it to be. The Hanafis say no. And the Hanafis add to this. There's a narration in the Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shaybah, where Jabir bin Abdullah and Abdullah bin Umar are narrating from the Prophet ﷺ, that the Prophet ﷺ said, "La mahra aqal min 'ashrati dirahim." There is no mahar that is less than 10 dirhams. Okay, so the Hanafis aren't just like making up the 10 dirhams. This 10 dirhams is actually coming from a narration from the Prophet ﷺ that is documented in the Musannaf of Ibn Abi Shaybah. Whereas the Shafi'is, they don't follow that particular narration, and they say it's a financial contract, so you can negotiate whatever you want. There's another narration in Ibn Majah where Aisha radiallahu anha, she said that the Prophet ﷺ said, "An-nikahu min sunnati," that the nikah is my sunnah. فَمَنْ لَمْ يَعْمَلْ بِسُنَّتِي فَلَيْسَ مِنِّي. Whoever doesn't act upon this, then they're not from us. So the Hanafis, for these reasons, for these narrations, they treat marriage as something greater than a financial transaction. And this has implications. So one thing we just talked about is the mahar. The mahar can be anything for the Shafi'is, but it has to be minimum 10 dirhams for the Hanafis. A second implication of this is, what does the text say here? على هذا أن التخلي لنفل العبادة أفضل من الاشتغال بالنكاح وأباح Okay. So according to the Shafi'is, according to the Shafi'is, if you were to like be engaging in sunnah acts of worship, so according to the Shafi'is, the marriage itself is not an act of worship. It's not an act of ibadah, right? It's a transaction. Therefore, if you're to do ibadah is greater than a transaction, right? And so if you're to be praying nafil prayers, that would be better than you getting married. Whereas for the Hanafis, you say no. For you to get married is also an act of ibadah. It's also a sunnah. It's also an act of ibadah. Therefore, to get married, it's from the sunnah of Rasulullah, as we said from this hadith that Aisha radiallahu anha narrated from Ibn Majah. And therefore, this is again implications of the way we're looking at it is in the Quran. Like, okay, Allah says He has designated a mahar. Okay, if He's designated it, then it can't just be like whatever amount you want. It has to be minimum 10 dirhams. Okay. Well, the Shafis are treating it as a financial contract. Because they're looking at it as a financial contract, the implication of that is praying nafil is better than getting married. For us, no. Getting married is like praying nafil. And so it's not like one is better than the other or something like that. And then we continue with this. And we say, okay, there's another fiqh issue that we have where the Shafi'is say because it's a financial contract, when you do khula', where the wife terminates the marriage by negotiating it with the husband, that khula' is a way of ending the marriage that is different. It's in a different category altogether. It's one way of ending the financial transaction, and there's a different way of ending the financial transaction, which is divorce. So if for example, if the wife negotiates a khula', the marriage ends, then the two of them decide to come back together, the man still has the right to 3 divorces. Whereas for the Hanafis, if she does a khula' and then they come back together, the man only has 2 divorces remaining because the khula' types counts as one of the 3 divorces. Okay, so that for the Hanafis, the khula' and the divorce like have a relationship to each other. A khula' is going to count as 1 divorce. Whereas for the Shafi'is, there's 2 ways to end this contract. One is khula', one is divorce, and the 2 have nothing to do with each other. If you did a khula', no problem, come back together, you still have 3 divorces remaining. Okay, let's continue with وَكَذَلِكَ قَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى
Can you explain that? Again?
Yeah, I mean the simple idea is for the Hanafis, the khula has certain similarities to a divorce. And one of those they say like, look, this whole thing is a marriage, act of ibadah. Yes, there's a contractual element of this ibadah. And the way you end it is some combination, a combination of three of khula or divorce. So if you've done a khula, then you only have 2 divorces left. You don't have 3 divorces left. The Shafi'is are going to say, no, if you did khula, that's fine. That's a different type of termination of the contract. You still have 3 divorces remaining. Now we're going to go to a different example altogether. We're going away from this Shafi'i example and all of this. We're going to a different example. We're still under the chapter of khas. And remember, we said that the khas is in the Quran is going to be preferred over khabar wahid and qiyas and all of this other stuff. So we're going to do an example of that one. وَكَذَلِكَ قَوْلُهُ تَعَالَى
وكذلك قوله تعالى فلا تحل له من بعد حتى تنكح زوجا غيره خاص في وجود النكاح من المرأة فلا يترك العمل به بما روي عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أيما امرأة نكحت بنفسها بغير إذن وليها فنكاحها باطل باطل باطل.
Okay. So what we're talking about here is one of the fundamental differences that we know in fiqh, and that difference is that the Hanafis allow nikah without a wali, whereas the Shafi'is, the Hanbalis, and the Malikis do not allow nikah without a wali, right? You have to have a wali. It's a condition of marriage for the other 3 madhabs, but it is not a condition of marriage for the Hanafis. And a variety of different evidences are used for this. And if you look at Daslas, he goes into a lot of detail about all the different evidences that support this opinion. However, for some reason nowadays in fiqh books, we only pay attention to this one evidence. I actually find this to be one of the weaker evidences, but this is the one that seems to have taken off as being presented as the one evidence. There's many, many, many other evidences, but this is the one that's used. And it's used as the verse in Surah Al-Baqarah where we say, حَتَّى تَنْكِحَ زَوْجًا غَيْرًا, that until a woman does تَنْكِحَ زَوْجًا غَيْرًا. Now, what does تَنْكِحَ here mean? It means that she marries زَوْجًا غَيْرًا. And the word تَنْكِحَ literally means that she marries herself. Not that someone else marries her off, that the wali marries her off, but that she herself marries another man. Okay, so if she herself marries another man, that means that she didn't need a wali. This is just based on the sigha of the fi'l. Okay, this is based on the fi'l. The fi'l is that she marries herself off. So she marries herself off, and there's no mention of a wali, and this is khas in the Quran. And so when we have the hadith that says, أَيُّ امْرَأَةٍ نَكَحَتْ بِغَيْرِ إِذْنِ مَوَالِيهَا فَنِكَاحُهَا بَاطِلٌ بَاطِلٌ بَاطِلٌ, right? There's a hadith that says whichever woman marries a man without the permission of her wali, then that nikah is going to be invalid, right? That hadith is considered khabar wahid, whereas we have something in the Quran which is khas. So when you have a contradiction or an apparent contradiction between a hadith and that something is in the Quran, we're going to give the Quran the preference. And by giving the Quran the preference, the argument that the Hanafis are creating over here is that the nikah is valid without the wali, because that's what the Quran is talking about. And therefore, something is off with that narration, which is in Abu Dawud and other places. And we don't accept that narration, or we don't accept the application of that narration. Okay?
Yeah, so this is more a hadith question.
Yeah.
And that we're getting into. So like when you have these khabar ahad, which relates to a lot of things, whether it's marriage, whether it's music, whatever it might be, where the chain is sahih, that's the reason it's accepted to begin with, but now it's contradicting the Quran. Like how do we rationalize that, I guess, whether it's with Orientalists, whether it's with Muslims who don't believe in hadith, where you're saying like you've done all of the verification, you
Yep.
know it's a legitimate person, but we don't accept it. Are we saying that they may have made a mistake in the transmission? There may have been like lost to something else. Like how do we rationalize that?
Yeah. So first of all, when we get into the chapter of Sunnah, we're going to learn that there's a two-part process. The first part of the process is us verifying the narration itself. Once we verify the narration, then we bring it into the realm of usul al-fiqh, and then we say, do we actually accept the narration and apply it in the scenario in jurisprudential matters? Okay. So there's the verification process. Is it sahih? Is it not sahih? And keep in mind, at the time Abu Hanifa was around, these words weren't really used. The word sahih, and like there wasn't, the science of hadith wasn't so well developed. Like the 5 conditions didn't exist the way that they do now of what a sahih is. That got codified later. So there are some principles that we used for verification, similar to declaring it sahih. We'll go through those, inshallah. Then there's another set of principles that we say, what do we do now that we have this sahih narration in Quran and they have issues with each other? And you'll find this even with a sahih hadith and a sahih hadith. What are all the different things that you can do to reconcile 2 opposing hadith that have different meanings against each other? What do you do in that process? Do you give preference to one or the other? Do you reconcile them? Do you do tawaqquf? Do we say we don't know what the right answer is? There's a variety of different answers that apply, and even in the sciences of hadith. But one of the fundamental things also to keep in mind is, what does the word sahih mean? How would you translate that in the sciences of hadith? If I say this hadith is sahih, what does that mean? Authentic? What does authentic mean?
Meets the criteria of like lab ta'adada.
Yeah. Now, does it mean that it actually happened? If I say, Qala Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said something, innama al-a'malu bin-niyat, etc., and then I say, hadha hadithun sahihun, does that mean he actually said it?
No, but we have a strong framework as to validating that it could have happened.
Yes. So it doesn't mean, like, because we don't know for sure. We don't know for sure, but what it does is this idea that hadith sciences, what they try and do is they try and put hadith into categories of, we're pretty sure that this actually happened, or like we're really darn sure that this thing happened, versus we're quite sure it didn't, or we don't really know because we have a lot of problems in the narrators or the chain and defects and all these other issues. So we don't really know if it happened, versus there's certain ones that are like, wow, we've sifted through these. The hadith, the muhaddithin were the best scientists at sifting through and bringing up the hadith that are really sound, that are really, really high quality. Does it mean it actually happened? We don't know. And therefore, the Hanafis have and the Malikis, and we talked about this before, they have a very, very strong view of taking the Quran as the main, as the asl, as the original, and all of the hadith have to fit within it. And if they don't, we'll say, listen, hadith are not perfect. They have issues. And so even if it's sahih, what can I tell you? The Quran is overruling it, and that's what we're going to take. And if the Orientalists ask about it, no problem. We can explain to them how Hanafi usul al-fiqh work. And say, look, there's such a thing as, we give Quran priority first, then we give hadith. Sahih is a way of giving a very high probability that this is a sound narration. It probably came from the Prophet ﷺ, but it doesn't mean it's 100%. Or it could also mean we don't understand the interpretation of this hadith. Maybe it means something else. Maybe the words have different meaning. Maybe we don't understand the context for this hadith. Maybe it was within, referring to a certain type of women or a certain time or something like that. Maybe we don't have full understanding of abrogation of hadith. So maybe there was a rule and that got taken away. There's a variety of different explanations that can be given, right? It could be abrogation. It could be interpretation. It could be authentication. It could be so there's lots of answers that can be applied over here. But the Hanafis are maybe the strongest in setting a very high bar for a hadith that seems to go against the Hanafi interpretation of the Quran. Okay, just very careful with the wording there, because obviously it's one interpretation of that verse of the Quran. You could argue a different interpretation of that verse of the Quran as well. And because of these different interpretations, we get differences of opinion. This is why we have differences of opinion. Okay. Continue, please. ويتفرع منه.
ويتفرع منه الخلاف في حل الوطء ولزوم المهر والنفقة والسكنى ووقوع الطلاق والنكاح بعد الطلقات الثلاث على ما ذهب إليه قدماء أصحابه بخلاف ما اختاره المتأخرون منه.
Okay, so ويتفرع منه. So this is how you get furu'. This is how you get more branches of issues. Because you go like, wait, why do the Hanafis and Shafis differ in this? Why do they differ in this? Why do they differ in that? So you find like, okay, if there's a difference of opinion on a marriage with a wali, without a wali. For the Hanafis, if you have a marriage that took place without a wali, the marriage took place, right? For the Shafi'is, what happened? The marriage didn't even take place. It's not a valid marriage. So if it's not a valid marriage, you're going to get into all these issues. The khilaf fi hilil wati, right? So can the man and the woman engage in sexual relations with each other? Well, for the Hanafis, yes, they can. They got married without a wali, no problem. They still can. For the Shafi'is, it's like, no, you don't have a marriage, therefore you cannot have relations with each other. وَلُزُومُ الْمَهْرِ وَالنَّفَقَةِ وَالسُّكْنَةِ. Okay, so does the man owe the woman mahr? For the Hanafis, yes, he does, because he got married. Does he owe her nafaqa, maintenance? Yes, because the marriage is valid. Sukna, yes, he owes her residence, right? The Shafis are like, nope, not even valid marriage. You don't owe her anything. وَوُقُوعِ الطَّلَاقِ وَالنِّكَاحِ بَعْدَ طَلَقَاتِ الثَّلَاثِ عَلَى مَا ذَهَبَ إِلَيْهِ. Okay, so then same thing happens. Like, what if he divorces her? Right? Or like having 3 divorces and then getting remarried after that. And all of these things, right? Like basically, for the Shafi'is, the divorce would not be valid because the marriage was not valid. For the Hanafis, the divorce would be valid because the marriage was valid. Right? So these are like kind of obvious things, right? But effectively, a simple way to say it is for the Hanafis, the marriage took place without the wali, and all the consequences of marriage also took place because the marriage took place. For the Shafi'is, the marriage was invalid, and therefore, all the consequences that would have resulted from marriage also did not take place. Okay?
So only the Hanafis say that you don't need a wali.
All the other ones say you need a wali because this narration is very explicit for them. Right? The narration is very explicit. So the argument that's made by the Shafi'is, the Hanbalis, and the Malikis is that, hey, listen, this narration is very clear. And the narration is authentic. And therefore, your interpretation of how you read the Quran is not correct. It's just saying the woman gets married. Like, don't get so literal and don't get so hung up on the sigha. Don't get so hung up on the fi'l. Like, you're like, the woman is marrying herself. It just means the woman gets married. Like, don't get so hung up on the exact literal wording. This is one of those cases. Usually it's the Hanbalis and sometimes the Shafi'is and mostly the Wahidis, but the Hanbalis, they get very literal. They see a hadith, they're like, oh yeah, it means exactly this thing. And they're like, they just start following that hadith. And the Hanbalis will, and we talked about this last time, right? That the Hanbalis will even take a weaker hadith and be like, oh yeah, we got to follow this literally. And the Hanafis are like, slow down there, buddy. Like, it's a weaker hadith. Like, don't get so hung up on this weaker hadith. Don't take the hadith so literally, right? But here's a case where you find that the Hanafis are so zoomed in on the literal wording of the Quran, and they're like, listen. And maybe that's appropriate, right? Because again, the Quran is word of Allah. And it is the exact word of Allah, right? With the qira'at and everything included, but like it's the word of Allah. There's no dispute, no argumentation about that. Whereas the hadith, you also have riwayah bil ma'na, right? So again, there's a lot of arguments that you can make. It's riwayah bil ma'na, so there's some change in transmission, there's abrogation, there's this, there's that. There's a million arguments you can make. But the Hanafis actually get very literal about the Quran. And you could say that's appropriate because the word of Allah is like, hey, if Allah's word is perfect, then you can maybe zoom in and get very literal and put the blinders on, right? and the Hanbalis and Shafi'is also get literal about the hadith. This is like, you're not gonna find this book of fiqh. I'm telling you kind of like how people view it, right? They get so literal about it. So this is one of those cases where the others are going to argue against the Hanafis. Another argument that can be made is like, hey, the Quran, yes, it's the word of Allah, but Allah is speaking in the language of the people. Don't always get so technical and hung up on the sigha of the fi'l. That could be one argument. Like Allah speaking language of the people, just take it as it comes. Right? Sometimes Allah speaks metaphorically, sometimes Allah speaks this way, you know. So you can create arguments both ways. But yes, Hanafis are the only ones that allow a marriage without a wali. Any other questions? We'll do a hand next time.
So all the things that come within marriage is valid for the Hanafis, but invalid for.
Yeah, yes, right. That's what we're saying would literally be the case. But let's say somebody got married because they're Hanafi, and they got married without a wali. And then, you know, they came to a Shafi'i scholar and they said, hey, like, this is what's going on in our marriage. Like, he's not going to be like, hey, your marriage is not valid to begin with, get married again, right? Like, he's not going to say that. He's going to be like, okay, you followed your madhab, you did it without the wali, like, fine. Like, you did it wrong, but you did it, you know? And they'll move on from that, right? Practically speaking, like, it's not like you get married and then you go to a Shafi'i scholar and they're like, oh, your marriage is not valid, you know, you're doing zina. Like, they're not going to do that. They might be against it from a fiqh perspective. They would argue that if you get married without a wali, that is zina, right? They might argue that, but like someone who's wise is not going to be like, hey, your marriage is not valid, go get married again. They're not going to do that. That'd just be creating fitna, right? That's like when you go to the masjid and you're praying behind someone who wipes on their socks, and you're like, that's not my madhab, so I'm not going to pray behind you, right? You don't create such fitna. That's that person's opinion. They're responsible for it. You have to follow yours. You're responsible for yours, right?
If you can ask a question related to the last class on this point about differences of opinion.
Yeah.
So you ended you mentioned a note about when we were talking about like the differences within the Hanafi school, right? Of interpretation. You brought up a point around that the Hanafi madhab may not have had access, right, to the full corpus of hadith earlier, which I know is something a lot of like some of like the non-madhab individuals talk about the Hanafi school. I guess isn't that
the Maliki school, by the way, is the same way, but yes, yeah, go on.
But isn't that the point of like the evolving Hanafi school, that don't they have access and don't they reconcile with all of the later hadith?
Yeah, so this is what you would think would be the case, is the true way, if you want to be true Hanafi, like Imam Abu Hanifa was a true thinker, mujtahid. His students differed from him because they were mujtahids, right? And there was some evolution that was happening. And if you look at Imam al-Tahawi, you're going to find he has some differences. Anwar Shah Kashmiri, there's some differences. So these people had some thoughts because they went back and they looked. Imam al-Tahawi, he was a muhaddith, right? And so he looked at the hadith, he said, you know what? There's a few hadith here that we found. We need to adjust some of our opinions a little bit based on finding these ahadith. So he tried to do that. But as much as everyone loves Imam Tahawi and they love his Sharh, you know, Ma'ani al-Athar and Mushkil al-Athar and all that stuff, they say, yeah, we don't follow those opinions of his. Those are not from the madhab. So they just discard it. So unfortunately, there was a movement to try and bring some of the hadith that were found by people like Imam al-Tahawi, and it didn't gain acceptance. People became a little more obsessed with defending the original opinions that were always there. And even when they found a hadith, they would find ways generally to, like, you know, if you look at the best example is the book Tajreed of Imam Quduri, not his Mukhtasar al-Quduri, not his Sharh of Mukhtasar al-Karhi, but his book Tajreed, in which he actually goes through, and he's very solid at it. By this time, we have Bukhari, we have Muslim, we have Abu Dawud, we have all of this stuff. So in his book, he brings a lot of narrations. Imam Muslim, he will dismiss the Shafi'is, like, hey, you know, you're using this hadith is not in Bukhari, it's not in Muslim, Abu Dawud didn't even bring it. You know, why are you using this hadith? This hadith has lots of problems. So Imam al-Quduri would bring these examples of hadith, and he would use that as argumentation to fight against the Shafi'is. But it's interesting because if you go through his book, he will often use hadith against the people of hadith, like Shafi'is, but he wouldn't use it against the Hanafis. So he was a little bit biased in how he did his argumentation. But the reality of the situation is we haven't really had mujaddids or mujtahids or people who came along and they argued and said, hey, listen, some slight adjustments should be made to some of the furu' in the madhab based on these ahadith that have now been found to be authentic. And then they gained acceptance because of it. Largely, that's true. However, also, you will find in modern times that's changing a little bit, at least. So if you notice, a lot of Hanafis will combine prayers now. Yeah. Why do they do that? Because when you go through the sheer number of narrations in the Musannafs, in the books of Hadith, and so on, you just go through the sheer number of them, and you look at them and you go, okay, these can't, like, and they're authentic. And there's so many sahih ones and so many hasan ones and so many of these, and you just go like, you know what, like, okay, like this proof is too strong. And so it's not, the Hanafis who combine prayers, some of them are like, yeah, I'm just taking an opinion from a different madhab. Many of them will just tell you, you know what, I've just studied too much hadith and I can't ignore this anymore.
But I mean, specific to that example, right? Are you saying that the overwhelming evidence, we know the evidence exists, but isn't the interpretation of it being suri, right? Or like actual or
the evidence goes against it, the hadith evidence, right? The hadith evidence specifically goes against it being suri.
Got it. Okay. That's helpful. I think because what's presented sometimes, and this might be a madhab by madhab case, because the usul differs from madhab by madhab, but sometimes they will say, you know, it's an evolving madhab. We always have access to the later hadith. But however, that actually goes against what you said about the Hanafis, which is if we actually were taking from Ibn Mas'ud, it doesn't matter about the later hadith that come. You're still
Correct.
going with the original.
Yeah, yes. If you're taking from Ibn Mas'ud, the hadith shouldn't matter so much. So there's always this like tension. Okay, we found a bunch of hadith, but then like we took from Ibn Mas'ud. So then what are we supposed to do? Are we supposed to stick to what we took from Ibn Mas'ud? Or are we supposed to take these hadith against it? And that's why you find the tension within the madhab. And you find people, and then some people like really want to stick to the original furu' and the original opinions. Other people are like, no, we should evolve it a little bit because, you know, we've learned new things. So there's all this tension, and that is why you continue to find the tension. And if you ask your IOK teachers, some of them combine and some of them don't, right? Because this tension continues to exist. And some people are like, yeah, I'd rather just stick with this one. And the other one are like, yeah, but you know, the evidence, I've just studied too much on the hadith side. Or so that's why you get these like differences of opinion. And again, the important part to realize is these differences are, they're from the rahmah of Allah. And you're never going to find such differences in the usul of the deen. You're never, ever, ever going to find these differences in the usul. They only happen in the branches of the religion. And they only tend to happen like, when Hanafis will accept this type of thing, it tends to be when it's just like Hanafi against everyone else, right? So this issue of combining prayers is one of those, where it's Hanafis against everyone else, the Muhaddithin, you know, the other three madhabs, and like even like people who go outside of the madhab and so on and so forth.
Exactly. It's helpful just to hear because, to your point, people will make claims about other madhabs or even their own madhab, but you never really know what's actually true until you start studying it.
Yeah, and sometimes it's usul, and sometimes it's linguistic differences, sometimes it's hadith differences, or all these differences. And sometimes people believe sticking to the madhab means sticking to the actual opinions, and sometimes people think sticking to a madhab means to follow the usul. And there's always a tension between all of these, and there's different methodologies applied by different people, and that's why you find all these different methods. And which one is correct? Well, that depends upon you, right? Because I'm not here to tell you this is the right answer. The right answer is you should stick to the furu' of the deen. The right answer is you should stick to the usul of the deen. The right answer is you should always take the strong hadith when it goes against like your lone madhab. The right answer is no, you should stick to it. You know, if Ibn Mas'ud is the principle, he's the principle. There's so many ways of trying to figure this out, right? And so that's why we get into these debates and arguments, and that's what I want you to understand, is not necessarily that there's one right answer. If you have one right answer, power to you. I have my right answers, or let me put it this way, I don't actually have my right answers. I believe like these are my answers, right? But when it comes to the differences, I want you to appreciate where the difference is coming from. And as long as you appreciate that, and there's something that appeals to you, like, you know, the thing we talked about last time, It's like, do you believe miswak is from Sunnah or not? Do you believe it is? Good for you. Just don't force that upon everyone else. If you want to have an academic discussion about it, I have no problem with that. Let's sit down and talk about it academically. Oh, well, the Prophet used the word. Is it am? Is it khas? Is it this? Is it that? Let's have that discussion. But at the end of it, if I walk away disagreeing with you, don't be like, oh yeah, like you're like outside the madhab. Your methodology is not right, like something like that, right? That's what we want to understand is like these differences. That helps us figure out. It's like because it's like oh man, like I thought like my answer was the right answer, but now I understand the other person. I understand where they're coming from. I don't agree with them, but I understand where they're coming from, and that's helpful.
Can I ask one more question, or do you have to go?
Yeah. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك ونرجو next time إن شاء الله.
Can I ask one more question, Sheikh, or do you have to go?
Make it quick.
Or I can schedule office hours, but the typically when you're deciding on which I'm to follow madhab wise, right? They typically tell you to stick to a madhab so that you have a framework or the usul are consistent. That's usually the argument that's presented.
Yeah.
Right. But then when you read some of the books of history or whatever it might be, like, does it really matter if you stick to the usul so long as other Sahaba still did it, right? Or the Prophet ﷺ did things other ways? I'm trying to reconcile between those two things. Why does it matter if we follow things exactly the way Ibn Mas'ud did it, even if we're Hanafi, if we know that other Sahaba did things differently?
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is that the fear is that you're going to find the most minority, one-off, weird opinion on every issue, and you're going to follow that, right? And so, for example, like if you pick the opinion where you don't need two witnesses from the Maliki madhab, and you pick the opinion you don't need the wali from the Hanafi madhab, and you pick the opinion that the mahar can be like almost nothing from the Shafi'i madhab, and you do like, you know what I'm saying? Like the fear is you're going to go pick this, and you're going to say that's what I'm going to follow, right? And you can back all of that up with usul from the madhabs, with evidences, with sahaba. There's sahaba that'll back you up in all of these things, right? But the fear is you're going to be like this, and then you're saying like, hey, look, I followed Islam. That's the fear. Reality is you only will do that kind of thing where you're picking like this one, if you're operating out of desire.
Yep.
You know when you're operating out of desire. Okay. If academically you've gone through the evidences and you've looked at the issue and you've talked to a scholar or whatever it is you've done, whatever your due diligence is, and you found I want this opinion, and you do that, and it's logically correct to you. The evidence is sound to you, and you're convinced that you're going to show up on the day of judgment. Allah's going to explain to Allah, look, this is what I thought was the right answer. I don't see a problem with that personally.
Super helpful.
Right. So if Allah gave you a mind and He gave you a heart and He gave you the ability to make decisions, He's just going to hold you accountable for that decision. Now, Allah is not going to hold us accountable for picking the right decision because, even like there's a whole philosophy behind fiqh and usul fiqh. Is there a right answer? Yeah, there's probably a right answer for some of these questions. Does it actually matter? No, because Allah's is like, did you follow what you thought was correct? Right? Logically, not based out of ignorance, not based out of desire, but based out of due diligence. It's just like when you choose the qibla. Okay, you're going to make a certain determination. This is the qibla. If it's wrong, is Allah going to say like you're going to show up on the day of judgment? You picked the wrong qibla. Your prayer is not going to be accepted. By the way, no, that's never going to happen. Allah's going to say, yeah, qibla was wrong, but you did your best. You did your best, good enough. Allah will accept it. So as long as you've done, if you are feeling like I can be responsible in front of Allah, inshallah, you will be fine. That's my view. And I think the fear is when you don't follow madhab that you can get inconsistent, or more than that, that you're going to pick like really silly stuff, and that's out of desire. But again, don't follow your desire and you'll be fine. Assalamu alaikum.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله وكفى والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى صلى الله تعالى عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن والاه أما بعد. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى آل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وعلى آل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد. Right, so we are continuing from Surah Fatir, page 639. Some preliminary information about the surah. Surah Fatir is a Makki surah, and it also has another name, which is Surah Al-Malaika, based on a word from the first ayah, just like the word Fatir also appears in the first ayah. It's a very short surah, focuses on the usul of Iman and the qudra of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, consoles the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and mentions the conditions of the believers and the non-believers, and gives examples of the kafir versus the mu'min and the jahil versus the alim, and many aspects of creation as the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power is mentioned. Okay. Bismillah, who is reading?
I can read Zainab unless you prepared.
Bismillah.
I just want to make sure that it's okay.
No, you can read.
بسم الله والحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله حمد تعالى نفسه بذلك كما بين في أول سبأ فاطر السماوات والأرض خالقهما على غير مثال سبق جاعل الملائكة رسلا إلى الأنبياء أولي أجنحة مثنى وثلاث ورباع يزيد في الخلق في الملائكة وغيرها ما يشاء إن الله على كل شيء قدير ما يفتح الله للناس من رحمة كرزق ومطر فلا ممسك لها وما يمسك من ذلك فلا مرسل له من بعده أي بعد إمساكه وهو العزيز الغالب على أمره الحكيم في فعله يا أيها الناس أي أهل مكة اذكروا نعمة الله عليكم بإسكانكم الحرم ومنع الغارات عنكم هل من خالق من زائدة وخالق مبتدأ غير الله بالرفع والجر نعت لخالق لفظا ومحلا وخبر المبتدأ يرزقكم من السماء المطر ومن الأرض النبات والاستفهام للتقرير أي لا خالق رازق غيره لا إله إلا هو فأنى تؤفكون من أين تصرفون عن توحيده مع إقراركم بأنه الخالق الرزاق وإن يكذبوك يا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم في مجيئك بالتوحيد والبعث والحساب والعقاب فقد كذبت رسل من قبلك في ذلك فاصبر كما صبروا وإلى الله ترجع الأمور في الآخرة فيجازي المكذبين وينصر المرسلين يا أيها الناس مرسلين
Finish the paragraph.
Yeah, sorry, I was gonna make so I lost where it was. Okay. يا أيها الناس إن وعد الله بالبعث وغيره حق فلا تغرنكم الحياة الدنيا عن الإيمان بذلك ولا يغرنكم بالله في حلمه وإمهاله الغرور الشيطان إن الشيطان لكم عدو فاتخذوه عدوا بطاعة الله ولا تطيعوه إنما يدعو حزبه أتباعه في الكفر ليكونوا من أصحاب السعير النار الشديدة الذين كفروا لهم عذاب شديد والذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لهم مغفرة وأجر كبير. فهذا بيان ما لموافق الشيطان وما لمخالفيه. Bismillah. All praises to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he praises himself in the way that he explained at the beginning of Surah Saba. فاطر السماوات والأرض, the originator of the heavens and the earth. خالقهما على غير مثال سبق, and he created them على غير مثال, unlike anything else was created before. جاعل الملائكة رسلا, the one who
خالقهما على غير مثال سبق, basically without any prior example or without any mold, without any blueprint, right? Because fatir in the very, very literal sense means someone who creates out of nothing. And to create something out of nothing means nothing like it existed before. And when we talk about creation, we are talking about using existing things. All right, and this is found in footnote number 10, right? كان أصل معنى فطري الشق ثم تجوز به عما ذكر وشاع فيه حتى صار حقيقة. قال القاضي كأنه شق العدم بإخراجهما منه, as if he tore open nothingness, al-adam, nothingness, by bringing it out of it. So creating something out of nothing, that very specifically is fatir versus khaliq.
and appoints the angels as messengers, إلى الأنبياء, to the prophets. ولأجنحة مثنى.
Your sound is very low.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but it's slow for some reason.
How about now?
Slightly better.
I'll try to read about
Happened before, but I don't know.
أولي أجنحة مثنى وثلاث ورباع, as messengers that have wings in twos, in threes and fours. يزيد في الخلق, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala adds to creation in the angels and whatever and other than them, whatever he wants. Inna Allah ala kulli shay'in qadir, and he is all powerful.
This idea of mathna wa thulatha wa ruba', if you look at footnote number 13, it says al-qasdu bihi at-takthir wa ikhtilafuhum fi adad al-ajniha. The meaning of twos and threes and fours is to show takthir, because there's a difference of opinion in the number of wings, because some have 600 or other than that. Okay. If you look at number 14, في الملائكة بزيادة أجنحة بعضها على بعض لو على أربع. Right, because مثنى وثلاث ورباع is the highest number mentioned in the ayah, but it could be more or less, even if it's 4. But the Prophet ﷺ saw Jibreel in his original form, and he had 600 janahin. He had 600, right? So this in and of itself is not meant to be taken literally.
Whatever blessing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opens for the people, from his mercy, like provision and rain, no one can withhold or hold it back. And وَمَا يُمْسِكْ مِنْ ذَلِكَ فَلَا مُرْسِلَ لَهُ مِنْ بَعْدِهِ, and there's no one to release it from that withholding thereafter. بَعْدَ إِمْسَاكِهِ, meaning after its withholding. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the mighty, الغالب على أمره, and he is the dominion or the one in charge over all matters. Al-Hakim, the wise, fi fi'li, in his actions. O you who believe, Ya ayyuhan nas, so O mankind, remember, meaning the people of Mecca, remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's favor upon you. Wiskanikumul hurum, that haram, by like allowing you to live in the haram and preventing al-gharat, like skirmishes or wars.
Raids, right? So if you think of the kind of social impact that the incident of the elephant happened, that the incident of the elephant had on Mecca and the people of Mecca, here was a very powerful army that could not be stopped, and they came to destroy the Kaaba, and on the dua of the Quraysh, Allah destroyed the army. So for anyone looking from the outside, they immediately would conclude that these people have the protection of Allah, which means that we cannot harm them, we cannot harm the Kaaba, and this prevented people from coming and raiding Mecca because it was a hub city, but you don't have narrations about it was continuously raided and so on, right? So it's a mercy of Allah that they were protected from those things.
Hal min khaliq, is there any creator? And min is zaida, meaning
It's extra.
like what exactly is it signifying?
No, it's extra. So whether you say hal min khaliqin or hal khaliqun ghayrullah, you'll still get the same meaning. Grammatically, it's not doing anything. That's the point.
But I guess what I'm asking is like, what's the purpose of including it then? Is it just for rhetoric?
Allah knows best. We don't know. Because we don't see a grammatical purpose to it, but it's included by Allah, but it's not adding anything more to the ayah.
Min za'idatin wa khaliqin mubtada, and khaliq is the mubtada. Ghayrullah, so is there any creator other than Allah? And it could be ghayrullah or ghayrillah, rafa or jar. Na'tali khaliq. Right?
It's na'atun.
Meaning that it could,
if you read it as jab, if you read it as hal min khaliqin ghayrillahi, then it is na'atun, it's sifa for the word khaliq. Ghayrillahi is the sifa for the word khaliq, lafdhan wa mahallan, in wording and in the placement of it, because the sifa is coming after the mawsuf. Okay. Wa khabar al-mubtada, and the khabar of the mubtada, so the entirety of hal min khaliqin ghayrullahi or ghayrillahi becomes a mubtada, and the khabar of this mubtada is yarzuqukum min as-sama.
So is there anyone other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who gives you provision from the sky, meaning rain, and from the earth, meaning plants? Wal istifham lit taqrir, and this is a question that is like emphasizes or affirms sorry?
Yeah, affirms.
Affirms that there is no other creation who provides other than him. La ilaha illa hu, there's no God except him subhanahu wa ta'ala, fa anna tufakun, so how will you then like it says, so to where are you being turned around, or like how do you
Yeah, so Khattab, how can you then be deluded from the truth? Right? Yeah.
من أين تصرفون عن توحيده, then where are you or to who are you turning?
No, you're being turned away. So from where? So where are you being turned away? عن توحيده, from his oneness.
عليكم بأنه خالق, when you already affirm that he is the creator and the provider. And if they deny you, O Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, fi maji'ik, in regards to like you coming with oneness and ba'ath, like the reckoning, and hisab, sorry,
Resurrection. Hisab is reckoning.
resurrection, reckoning, and punishment. فَقَدْ كُذِّبَتْ رُسُلٌ مِّن قَبْلِكَ, that others, messengers before you, were denied in that. فَاصْبِرْ كَمَا صَبَرُوا, and so be patient as they were patient. And to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala returns all matters. الْآخِرَةِ, in the hereafter. فَيُجَازِي, and he will recompense those who denied, and he will help the messengers. Ya ayyuhan nas, that O mankind, inna wa'dallah, that the promise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of resurrection and other than it is true. فَلَا تَغُرَّنَّكُمْ, so do not let the world or the life of the world deceive you from faith in that. وَلَا يَغُرَّنَّكُمْ بِاللَّهِ, and وَلَا يَغُرَّنَّكُمْ بِاللَّهِ الْغَرُورُ, and do not let the one who deceives deceive you from Allah.
So Gharur is chief deceiver, right? Or the big deceiver, right? Gharur is in the scale of Ghafur, right? So there's Mubalagha there, right? So the big deceiver, the shaitan, should not deceive you regarding Allah, regarding his hilm, regarding his forbearance, the fact that Allah continues to bear disobedience, وَإِمْهَالِهِ, and continues to give chances and time, muhla, right? So that's kind of weaponized against the believer, and the person is enticed to be disobedient for that reason. That, the punishment's not coming down, so it should be fine, or Allah forgives, etc., etc.
In his shaitan, that indeed shaitan is an enemy for you, so take him as an enemy by obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and do not obey him, meaning shaitan. إِنَّمَا يَدْعُو حِزْبَهُ, that he only invites to his group, اتبعوا في الكفر, to follow disbelief, ليكونوا من أصحاب السعير, so that they become people of the fire, intense fire. الذين كفروا لهم عذاب شديد, those who disbelieve will have a severe punishment, and those who believe and do righteous actions or deeds, for them is forgiveness and a great reward. فهذا بيان ما لمواقف الشيطان وأن يخالف, and this is an explanation of what like the place of shaitan will be, of people who followed shaitan versus those who opposed him.
So so the adherents of shaitan and those who oppose him. Because the ayah right before this talks about shaitan being your enemy, and the reason shaitan is your enemy is because the ayah before that says shaitan is the big deceiver. Because he is the big deceiver, he deceives you about his intentions, so you should know that he's your enemy, and you should take him as your enemy, right? And his followers are led or will be led into the fire by him. And those who follow him are the disbelievers, and they have punishment. And those who do not follow him and believe and do good, they have forgiveness and Jannah. So this is the explanation of the people who follow shaitan versus the ones who do not.
ونزل في أبي جهل وغيره أفمن زين له سوء عمله تمويه فرآه حسنا من مبتدأ خبره كمن هداه الله لا دل عليه فإن الله يضل من يشاء ويهدي من يشاء فلا تذهب نفسك عليهم على المزين لهم حسرات باغتمامك ألا يؤمنوا إن الله عليم بما يصنعون فيجازيهم عليه والله الذي أرسل الرياح وفي قراءة الريح فتثير سحابا المضارع لحكاية الحال الماضية أي تزعجه فسقناه فيه الالتفات عن الغيبة إلى بلد ميت بالتشديد والتخفيف لا نبات بها فأحيينا به الأرض من البلد بعد موتها يبسها أي أنبتنا به الزرع وكذلك النشور أي البعث والإحياء. And it was revealed that it was revealed regarding Abu Jahl and other than him أفمن زين له سوء عمله that can the one whose evil deed that is so much adorned for him بالتمويه meaning by like distorting or altering it فرآه حسنا appear to be like something good and man is the mubtada and the khabar is كمن هداه الله.
No, yeah, so the khabar is basically mahdoof, right? So man zuyyina lahu su'u amalihi fara'ahu hasana, that's the entirety of that is a mubtada. That for the one whose evil actions has been beautified and they see it as good because it was distorted, ... The khabar is, man hadahullah, right? Basically, would Allah guide them or will Allah guide them? La. Because a person gets to that point by consistently disobeying Allah, right? Or Faman hadahullah is contrasted by this person. In other words, the one whose evil actions has been beautified and they see it as good, are they like the person who has been guided by Allah? No, they're not. Does that make sense?
And no, this is indicated by فإن الله يضل من يشاء, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he will misguide who he wills and he will guide who he wills.
So we don't, so yudillu man yasha, you could do the literal translation, but it sounds disrespectful to say misguide because, Allah is hadi. Allah is the one who guides, but there's no opposite of it that Allah is the one who misguides. Na'udhu, right? So the translation of dhalla yudillu in relation to Allah is, for example, Khattab translates it as the one who Allah leaves to stray, or the one Allah lets go astray. Allah knows that this person is kind of drifting away, and Allah lets them be because they had enough opportunity and the resources to make the right decision.
لا تذهب نفسك عليهم حسرات, and he does not let your souls like لا تذهب نفسك عليهم حسرات, it says that he does not let your soul collapse in grief for them, meaning for those that their actions are beautified for. باغتمامك ألا يؤمنوا, by becoming like worried that they do not believe. Inna Allah alimun bima yasnaun. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is aware of what they do. فَيُجَازِيهِمْ عَلَيْهِ, and He will recompense them for their actions. وَاللَّهُ الَّذِي أَرْسَلَ الرِّيَاحَ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that sends winds. And in another qira'ah, الرِّيحَ فَتُثِيرُ سَحَابًا, and they like stir or raise the clouds. المضارع لحكاية الحال الماضية. And this is like the
So the Mudarir
that it's
is being used to narrate something that happened in the past.
أي تزعجه, that like it stirs them up. فسقناه, and we like فسقناه, and we drive them. And this is switching from the second to the third person. إلى بلد ميت, so we drive them to a dead land, and this is emphasizing بالتشديد والتخفيف. بالتشديد والتخفيف, so it's saying, how is it emphasizing and making it light?
No, Tashdid and Takhfif is talking about the Shadda and Sukun. So Mayithin versus Maitin.
Oh, okay. بيت لا نبات بها, that there is no, where there is no plants. فأحينا به الأرض, and that He will revive the earth. من البلد, of that land. بعد موتها, after it has been dead. يبسها أي ينبتها بالزرع, like it being dry, meaning that we grow crops. And والكلى, like, is it like fruits or things you can eat?
Ela, grass.
كذلك النشور, and that is in a similar way shall be the resurrection, meaning al-ba'th, the resurrection and bringing to life. من كان يريد العزة فلله العزة جميعا, أي في الدنيا والآخرة, فلا تنال منه إلا بطاعته فليطعه. إليه يصعد الكلم الطيب يعلمه وهو لا إله إلا الله ونحوها, والعمل الصالح يرفعه يقبله, والذين يمكرون المكرات السيئات بالنبي في دار الندوة. من تقييده ومن تقييده أو قتله أو إخراجه, كما ذكر في الأنفال. لهم عذاب شديد ومكر أولئك هو يبور, يهلك أو يهلك. والله خلقكم من تراب بخلق أبيكم آدم منه, ثم من نطفة أي مني بخلق ذريته منها, ثم جعلكم أزواجا ذكورا وإناثا, وما تحمل من أنثى ولا تضع إلا بعلمه, حال أي معلومة له, وما يعمر من معمر, أي ما يزاد في عمر طويل أو عمر طويل العمر, ولا ينقص من عمره, أي من ذلك المعمر أو معمر آخر, إلا في كتاب هو اللوح المحفوظ, إن ذلك على الله يسير هين. That whoever desires honor, then to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala belongs all honor, أي في الدنيا والآخرة, in this life and the next. And whoever فلا تنال منه إلا بطاعته, and it cannot be attained from him except by his obedience. So you should obey him. إليه يصعد الكلم الطيب, towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ascends a pure word. يعلمه وهو لا إله إلا الله ونحوها. And he knows of it, and this includes لا إله إلا الله and what is similar to that. والعمل الصالح يرفعه, and righteous deeds lift it, meaning for acceptance.
Mhm.
والذين يمكرون and whoever plots like al-makarat, evil, or yeah, like this plans, plots, as-sayyat, evil, bin nabi, against the prophets, fi dar al-nadwa, like in the assembly, min taqlidihi.
So if you look at footnote number 8, هو دار بمكة يجتمعون فيه للمشورة والندوة الاجتماع ومنه النادي. Right? So this is where they used to sit down and discuss and decide.
In imprisoning him or killing him, إخراجه, or expelling him, as it was mentioned in Surah Al-Anfal. لهم عذاب شديد, for them will be a severe punishment. ومكر أولئك هو يبور, and their plotting shall come to, like their plotting itself will perish. يهلك, will be destroyed. والله خلقكم من تراب, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you from dust, بخلق أبيكم, as he created your father Adam, then from a drop of sperm. أي مني بخلق ذريته, like the impure fluid by which he created children from. ثم جعلكم أزواجا, and then he created wives or spouses, ذكورا وإناثا, males and females. وما تحمل من أنثى ولا تضع إلا بعلمه, and no female, وما تحمل من أنثى, female conceives, ولا تضع, حال, and this is, حال.
Well, تضع, right, is basically delivers. So no female conceives, nor do they deliver except by the knowledge of Allah. So إلا بعلمي is either the hal, or it is it's the hal of تحمل من أنثى ولا تضع, meaning معلومة له, it happens by the knowledge of Allah.
وما يعمر من معمر, that no aged person is made to advance in his age. أي ما يزاد في عمر, meaning increase in their age for like a long life. ولا ينقص من عمر, nor decrease in their life. أي من ذلك المعمر, meaning like of that person's age or someone other than them. إلا في كتاب, except that it is recorded in a book, and that is لوح المحفوظ. إن ذلك على يسير, that is something that is easy for Allah. هين, easy.
I can continue. بسم الله. وما يستوي البحران هذا عذب فرات شديد العذوبة سائغ شرابه شربه.
شرب.
وهذا ملح أجاج شديد الملوحة ومن كل منهما تأكلون لحما طريا هو السمك وتستخرجون من الملح وقيل منهما حلية تلبسونها هي اللؤلؤ والمرجان وترى تبصر الفلك السفن فيه في كل منهما مواخر تمخر الماء أي تشقه بجريها فيه مقبلة ومدبرة بريح واحدة لتبتغوا تطلبوا من فضله تعالى بالتجارة ولعلكم تشكرون الله على ذلك. يدخل الله الليل في النهار فيزيد، ويولج النهار يدخله في الليل فيزيد، وسخر الشمس والقمر كل منهما يجري في فلكه لأجل مسمى يوم القيامة. ذلكم الله ربكم له الملك، والذين تدعون تعبدون من دونه أي غيره وهم الأصنام ما يملكون من قطمير لفاقة النواة إن تدعوهم لا يسمعوا دعاءكم ولو سمعوا فرضا ما استجابوا لكم ما أجابوكم، ويوم القيامة يكفرون بشرككم بإشراككم إياهم مع الله أي يتبرؤون منكم من عبادتكم إياهم، ولا ينبئك بأحوال الدارين مثل خبير عالم وهو الله تعالى. The two bodies of water are not alike. One is fresh, palatable, very sweet and pleasant to drink, and the other is salty, and bitter. Yet from both of them you eat tender seafood, and that is fish, and extract
طرية, fresh meat. This is under Gosht Taza, right? So fresh meat, which is obviously referring to the fish, right?
and extract ornaments to wear, which is pearls and corals. And you see the ships plowing their way through both, meaning it like cuts the water.
So basically, mawakhira or tamkhur al-ma'u, that cleaves through, cuts through the water, right? Right?
By its flowing, going backwards and forwards and backwards in one wind.
And so the ships are pushed. This is before kind of like motorized, rotors and things like that, right? Ships used to be able to navigate the waves and kind of go along the direction of the wind, right? The sails and things like that. Okay, so this ayah, interestingly, if you look at footnote number 13 on the previous page, it says that there's a possibility that this ayah, which is talking about two bodies of water, one sweet and one bitter, is mathal of a believer and a disbeliever. And it kind of shows the qualities of each and some of the benefits that you can derive from each one. Or it could simply mean that it's just talking about the two distinct bodies of water, which has many, many benefits extracted from it. Right? And so when it comes to comparing the two, because you could say that, okay, Allah says that وَمِن كُلِّ مِنْهُمَا تَأْكُلُونَ لَحْمًا طَرِيًّا, you're getting benefit from both, right? You're getting benefit from both. Both bodies of water give you fish. Both bodies of water, وَقِيلَ مِنْهُمَا, right? Or you could say that it is only the salty water that gives you hilya, that gives you things of beauty like pearls, etc. And ships are able to travel on both as well. So if this ayah is actually tashbih of the believer and the non-believer, then the sweet body of water, fresh body of water, which is the believer, gets the edge because you are able to drink fresh water versus the salty water. Does that make sense? So you could, both types of people can be good, and there might be benefits from both, but clearly the fresh body of water has an edge over the salty body. And what you find in one, you find in the other, in terms of ship and food, right? But you don't find the drinking part. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
لتبتغوا, so you may seek his bounty through business and give thanks to Allah for that. He merges the night into the day and the day into the night. فيزيد, like, I'm not sure what Yazid means here.
So
He extends it.
yeah, so when we say that the night enters the day and the day enters the night, the length of each, extends based on the time of the year, right? So when it does, then it takes from the other. So when the nights are short, the days are long. When the days are short, the nights are long, like that.
And has subjected the sun and the moon, each orbiting for an appointed term, until the day of judgment. That is Allah, your Lord. والذين تدعون له الملك, all authority belongs to him, but those idols you invoke, you worship besides Allah, meaning other than Allah, and those are the idols, do not possess even the skin of a date stone. It's referring to like the thin peel that's on the date seed. In tad'uhum, if you call upon them, they cannot hear you, and if they were to hear, hypothetically, they could not respond to you. And on the day of judgment, they will disown your worship of them. بإشراككم, by your like associating partners with them along with Allah, meaning they will declare themselves free of your worship of them. And no one can inform you, O Prophet, of the situation of this world and the hereafter, like the all-knowledgeable, the all-knower, and that is Allah the Almighty. يا أيها الناس أنتم الفقراء إلى الله بكل حال والله هو الغني عن خلقه الحميد المحمود في صنعه بهم إن يشاء يذهبكم ويأتي بخلق جديد بدلكم وما ذلك على الله بعزيز شديد ولا تزر نفس وازرة آثمة أي لا تحمل وزر نفس أخرى وإن تدعو نفس مثقلة بالوزر إلى حملها منه أحدا ليحمل بعضه لا يحمل منه شيء ولو كان المدعو ذا قربى قرابة كالأب والابن وعدم الحمل في الشقين في الشقين حكم من الله إنما تنذر الذين يخشون ربهم بالغيب أي يخافونه وما رأوه لأنهم المنتفعون بالإنذار وأقاموا الصلاة أداموها ومن تزكى تطهر من الشرك وغيره فإنما يتزكى لنفسه فصلاحه مختص به وإلى الله المصير المرجع فيجزي بالعمل في الآخرة. O humanity, O humanity, it is you who stand in need of Allah in every situation, but Allah alone is the self-sufficient of His creation, the praiseworthy in His actions to them or with them. If He willed, He could eliminate you and produce a new creation instead of you, and that is not at all difficult for Allah. وَلَا تَزِرُ, no soul burdened with sin will bear the burden of another soul, and if a sin burdened soul cries for help with its burden, none of it will be carried even by a close relative, like the father or the son, and not carrying the burden in both Shaqain is referring to
Instances, right?
Is a command from Allah. إنما تنذر, you Prophet can only warn those who stand in awe of their Lord without seeing Him, meaning they fear Him while and they have not seen Him, because they are the ones who benefit from the warning, and establish prayer, meaning consistently. وَمَنْ تَزَكَّى, whoever purifies themselves of shirk and other things, they only do so for their own good, meaning its benefit is specific to him. And to Allah is the final return. So He will recompense for the action in the hereafter. وما يستوي الأعمى والبصير الكافر والمؤمن ولا الظلمات الكفر ولا النور الإيمان ولا الظل ولا الحرور الجنة والنار وما يستوي الأحياء ولا الأموات المؤمنون والكفار وزيادة لا في الثلاثة تأكيد إن الله يسمع من يشاء هدايته فيجيبه بالإيمان وما أنت بمسمع من في القبور أي الكفار شبههم بالموتى فلا يجيبون إن ما أنت إلا نذير منذر لهم إنا أرسلناك بالحق بالهدى بشيرا من أجاب إليه ونذيرا من لم يجب إليه وإن ما من أمة إلا خلا سلف فيها نذير نبي ينذرها وإن يكذبوك أي أهل مكة فقد كذب الذين من قبلهم جاءتهم رسلهم بالبينات المعجزات وبالزبور كصحف إبراهيم وبالكتاب المنير هو التوراة والإنجيل فاصبر كما صبروا ثم أخذت الذين كفروا بتكذيبهم فكيف كان نكير إنكاري عليهم بالعقوبة والإهلاك أي هو واقع موقعه. And the blind, those blind and those who can see are not equal, meaning the disbeliever and the believer, nor are the darkness and the light, and the darkness is disbelief and the light is faith, nor the scorching heat and the cool shade, and the shade is referring to Jannah, and this scorching heat is referring to the hellfire. Nor are the dead and the living equal, meaning the believers and the disbelievers, and the addition of la in the 3 verses are for emphasis. Allah alone makes whoever He wills hear, meaning whoever's guidance He wills. So He responds to them with faith. But you, O Prophet, can never make those in the graves hear your call, meaning the disbelievers, and He likened them to the dead people because they do not, or فلا يجيبون, so they will not respond. You are only a warner to them. We have surely sent you with the truth, with guidance as a deliverer of good news to whoever responds to it, and a warner to those who do not. There is no community that that has passed that did not have a warner, a prophet to warn them. If they deny you, meaning if the people of Mecca deny you, so did those before them. Their messengers came to them with clear proofs, miracles, divine books like the scriptures of Ibrahim, and enlightening suhuf, like scrolls. Okay, so the scrolls of Ibrahim, and enlightening scriptures like the Torah and Injil. So
if you look at footnote number 1, so obviously Zubur, is very similar to the word Zabur, but here وَبِالزُّبُرِ هُوَ اسم لكل ما يكتب. Anything that's written is basically called the Zubur. So like صحف إبراهيم وهي 30 scrolls, صحف موسى قبل التوراة, and the scrolls of Musa alayhi salam were given to him before the Torah was revealed, and they were 10. وصحف شيث عليه السلام وهي 60, they were 60. فجملة الصحف 100, so 100 suhuf in total, right? And these are connected or combined with the 4 books. So the total of kutubus samawiyya, in the very literal sense, writings that have been sent down from the heaven, 104. So 100 scrolls and 4 books.
So be patient, like they were patient. Then I seized those who persisted in disbelief through their denying. So how severe was my response upon them through punishment and destruction, meaning it took its place.
Okay, stop here. One day. Let's do a bit of Fidat al-Nahr. All right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah wa kafa wa salamun ala ibadihi alladhina istafa. Okay, so we're talking about the different causes of Ghayr Munsarif. And the last one that we talked about was ta'neeth, right? So ta'neeth can come with a literal ta marbuta, or it could be without any visible sign of ta'neeth, but they would still be considered mu'annath words. And ta'neeth words can also come with alif maqsura and alif mamduda. Alif maqsura is the one with the lam and silent ya. Mamduda is the one with the alif and hamza. And the ta'neeth of alif maqsura and alif mamduda are equivalent to two causes. Right? So if you just have that, then a word is considered غير منصرف in and of itself, on its own, and you don't need to look for a second cause. Okay? So we're continuing from page 48. And this is ma'rifa, tafsilul ma'rifa. So ma'rifa is أحكام المعرفة أما المعرفة فلا يعتبر في منع الصرف بها إلا العالمية. So the only thing that is considered to be ma'rifa, or at least when we say ma'rifa in terms of غير منصرف, the only one that is considered is alam. Because if you remember from Tuhfa, and it's going to come up again in this book as well, ma'rifa has more than one type, right? So the only ma'rifa, or the only type of ma'rifa we consider in غير منصرف is alam. It's basically a name of a person, place, or thing. And shartul alam, condition of alam, is that تجتمع مع غير الوصف. Alam can only join with anything other than a wasf. Okay, so alam and wasf cannot come together, but alam can be the cause with any of the other causes. So you could have alam and alif nun, alam and ta'neeth, alam and adal, so on and so forth. All right, make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that's simple, straightforward. The next one is tafsilul ujma. Ujma basically means foreign word, non-Arabic word. أحكام العجمة أما العجمة فشرطها أن تكون علما. The condition of ujma is that it is a name fil ujmati, in the foreign language. Okay, so it has to be a name in the foreign language. And وزائده على ثلاثة أحرف, and it has to be more than 3 letters, like the word Ibrahim. أو ثلاثيا, or it's 3 letters. However, متحرك الأوسط, it has to have a haraka on the middle letter, متحرك الأوسط. And this basically takes out the names like Nuh, 3 letters, but has sukun in the middle. Does that make sense? Lut and Sheet, right? This comes up on a table on the next page. If you look at the table on the next page, it gives the first 4 names, Muhammad, Salih, Shu'aib, and Hud, as being Arabic names, although Hud, some say it's a non-Arabic name. Nuh, Lut, and Sheet are also considered non-Arabic names. However, why do we not read these as غير منصرف? We don't read them as غير منصرف because they are alam, they are ujma, but they are 3 letters with the sukun in the middle letter. Okay, so in order for you to consider a non-Arabic name as a cause for غير منصرف alongside alam, it has to be either more than 3 letters like Ibrahim, or 3 letters with the middle letter having a haraka. Make sense? Right, so you have the word Shatar, which is the name of a fortress, right? So you don't consider this to be a munsarif word, you would say it's a ghayr munsarif. So, for example, the word lijamun is munsarifun li'adami al-alamiyya. The word lijam, which means a harness or stirrup, because it's lagam, right? In Urdu, you have the word lagam, which is what's used for on the horse. It's a foreign word. It's 3 letters, because if you just take out the alif, basically lam, jim, and mim. However, it's considered a munsarif because it's not alam, it's not a name. وَنُوحٌ, the name Nuh is alam, and it's a foreign word. However, munsarifun, it is munsarif li-sukun al-awsat, because of its middle letter being sukun. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. تفصيل الجمع. جمع as a cause of غير منصرف. أحكام الجمع. أما الجمع فشرطه أن يكون على صيغة منتهى الجموع. As for جمع, its condition is that it has to be on the form of منتهى الجموع. منتهى الجموع. I'll explain that in a bit. What is the منتهى الجموع, or how does it look like? صيغة منتهى الجموع وهو أن يكون بعد ألف الجمع. It is that which comes after the alif of jama'. Now it could come in the form of 2 letters, harfan, like the word masajid. So alif of jama' and then you have jim and dal. أو حرف مشدد, or it could come in the form of a shadda, like the word dawab. So alif is jama' or alif of jama', and then ba is 2 letters with a shadda. أو 3 أحرف أوسطها ساكن غير قابل للحاء. Or it is 3 letters with the middle letter being sakin, without it accepting a ha. Without it accepting a ha. And when they say ha, they mean that it cannot accept a round ta, because it's called a ha because when you do waqf on Fatima, for example, you don't say Fatimat. Does that make sense? You don't pronounce the ta, you say ha, which is why it's called a ha, but that's what they are referring to. So 3 letters that come after the alif of jama', and the middle of those 3 letters is sakin, like the word masabih. So jama' muntaha al-jumu'ah, simply put, means the final form of jama'. The final form of jama'. What is the final form of jama'? The final form of jama' basically means if a word has 2 jama' forms, the second one is called the muntaha al-jumu'ah. It has 2 jama' forms, the second one is called muntaha al-jumu'ah. If a word only has 1 form, then that form is called the muntaha al-jumu'ah. Okay? Look at footnote 118. The term jama' muntaha al-jumu'ah, the last plural, is a reference to the last and final plural of a noun. Some nouns have plurals, which in turn have plurals themselves. So the jama' of a jama'. Example, the word kalb has a plural aklub, which has a plural akalib. Therefore, the plural aklub won't be considered as jama' muntaha al-jumu'ah, because there's another one after it. But the word akalib will be considered jama' muntaha al-jumu'ah. But some nouns only have 1 plural. Example, the word masjid has a plural masajid. So that would be considered the final plural. That will be considered jama' muntaha al-jumu'ah. Does that make sense? So in addition to the word that is ta'neeth through alif maqsura and alif mamduda, in addition to that cause being equivalent to 2, jama' is also considered equivalent to 2. So masajid, for example, doesn't need another cause. The fact that it's jama' automatically makes it, the fact that it's jama automatically makes it غير منصرف. But the jama, not all jama are غير منصرف, obviously, right? So the word rijalun, for example, is rijalan and can be rijalin. So not every jama form is going to be غير منصرف. The jama forms that are going to be غير منصرف are the ones that are basically 2 letters after the alif of jama, masajid, or 1 harf mushaddad after the alif of jama, like dawab, or 3 letters, the middle of which is sakin, like the word masabih. Does that make sense? So if you look at number 3 under footnote 117, that explains this last one a little more. The word has to be such that it itself never accepts the ta marbuta in any situation. So for example, the word sayaqila will not be considered a cause despite being on the above scale, because sayaqila has 3 letters after the alif. However, it accepts the ta marbuta, therefore we're not going to consider it as jama. It also has a haraka on the middle of the last 3 letters, right? And this is mentioned further on page 51. فَصَيَاقِلَةٌ, which means someone who polishes, and فَرَازِنَةٌ, which is a reference to the queen in chess, the chess piece, the queen is called farazina. So sayaqila and farazina are munsarif liqubulihima al-ha, because they both accept the ta marbuta. وهو أيضا, and the jama is also قائم مقام السببين. It is equivalent to 2 causes, or it stands in place of 2 causes. Why? Because of al-jam'iyyah, because of it being jama', and waluzumiha, and also being an intense form of a jama'. Jama' muntaha al-jumuh means that it's a jama' of a jama'. So that makes it equivalent to 2 causes. This came up on page 47 when we were talking about ta'neef of alif maqsura and alif mamduda. They said the sabab in that is ta'neef and luzum ta'neef, right? It kind of intensifies the ta'neef of the word, therefore it's considered equivalent to 2 clauses, right? Tafsilu luzumiha. So what do we mean by luzum of jama'? وَإِمْتِنَاعُ أَنْ يَجْمَعَ مَرَّةً أُخْرَى جَمْعَ التَّكْسِيرِ فَكَأَنَّهُ جَمْعَ مَرَّتَيْنِ. Okay, it's prevented, right? It's prevented from having like another jama' form. Okay, so as if, because of its intensity, it's as if it has become a jama' twice over. Okay, let's look at footnote 120. The jama' muntaha al-jumu' is regarded as 2 causes because one cause is plural and the second cause is that it's very strongly attached to plurality, luzumul jama'. And it's such that the scale has not been found in a word that is singular. Therefore, because of this attachment, it's as if the jama' cause has happened twice. Okay.
Can you explain that? I don't understand. What's the delineation between? So you're saying it's plural. What do they mean by very strongly attached to plurality?
So it's the same way they explained luzum al-ta'neef under alif maqsura and alif mamduda, right? Which we did on Monday.
I don't think I caught up that one.
Right? So in that one, again, there is no visible reason as to why a muannath word that ends with alif maqsura and alif mamduda should be considered equivalent to 2 causes. Well, they consider it as such because of what they call a strong attachment to ta'nith. Okay? Because of a strong attachment to ta'nith. So in this case, the Jama' Muntaha al-Jumu'ah, because it is the Jama' of a Jama', all right, if that's the case, or it's literally the Jama' form of a word because of it having two letters after the alif, or one mushaddad letter after the alif, or three letters after the alif that has sukoon in the middle, right? Because of these factors, it's not just a plural form, but the particular form of it makes it more stronger, or a more higher form of Jama', which basically makes it equivalent to two causes.
So when they're saying this whole very strongly attached, it's basically, like you said, classified as a higher form of it. So that's the reason.
It's classified as such because it comes in a very particular form. So there are basically two letters after the alif, masajid, or one mushaddad letter after the alif, dawab, or three letters with the middle letter being sukoon after the alif, like masabih. That's not the case for every other jama'. Kitabun, kutubun. The word kutub is not ghayr munsarif because it's a jama', but it's not a Jama' Muntaha al-Jumu'ah Jama'. Does that make sense? And then if you have the word qalam, aqlam, you have an alif of Jama', but you only have one letter after it. You have rajulun, rijalun. You have the alif of Jama' and you have one letter after it. So not every Jama' automatically qualifies to be Jama' Muntaha al-Jumu'ah.
Makes sense.
Okay. The next cause is compound words. تفصيل التركيب. أحكام التركيب أما التركيب فشرطه أن يكون علما بلا إضافة ولا إسناد. What can you do تركيب? Like what words can you use for تركيب? The condition for you to have a tarkib word is that both of the words, before they were connected to each other, either through isnad or through idafa, both words were alam words to begin with. So you can't, for example, do tarkib between an ism and a fa'il. It has to be between two isms. It can't be between an ism and a harf. It has to be between two isms, and the two isms have to be alam. Right? So the most famous example of this is ba'ala bakka. المثال لغير منصرف في التركيب ba'ala bakka. Okay? Ba'ala bakka. So ba'al, this is mentioned at the bottom of page 51. Ba'alun was originally the name of an idol. Bakkun was originally the name of a king and leader. Both words were combined to become Ba'ala Bakka, which is in English Baalbek. And this is the name of a valley in Lebanon. Okay. So it's a word which didn't exist until two separate alam words were put together. Okay. And when they are put together, they are now considered to be a ghayr munsarif word. Now, when it comes to tarkib, okay, when it comes to tarkib, tarkib has multiple different forms. Multiple different forms. So look at the table on page 52. All of them are things that we already know. So tarkibul isnadi is basically what we call a musnad ilay structure. Mubtada khabar. Zaydun qa'imun, there's a connection between the two. There's an isnad between the two. It's a type of tarkib. But obviously, it's not a ghayr munsarif. We have tarkibul idafi, right? When you do idafa, you create a connection between the mudaf and mudaf ilayh. غلام زيد. But that is not the tarkib that would make it غير منصرف. You have تركيب التوصيفي, موصوف صفة. You create a connection between موصوف and the word that is describing the موصوف, like غلام مجتهد. But obviously this is also not غير منصرف. You have تركيب الصوتي. You have تركيب الصوتي, basically a connection which is kind of, which is not necessarily a full type of tarkib, but the second part of it is kind of a sound. Like the word Sibawayh, for example. Sibawayh, because his name is actually Sib. So Sibawayh, for example, some say that his name comes from apple, Seb, right? So Sibawayh is the one of apple. So the way, the ha part, is just a noise that comes because it's a sound that comes because you have combined the two parts. But Sibawayh is not considered غير منصرف either. But it's a type of tarkib. You have tarkibul bina'i, right? This is specific to numbers. So for example, when you want to say 11, you could just say ahadun wa asharun, 1 and 10. Literally, you could say ahadun wa asharun, 1 and 10. However, what do? You combine the two tarkib, you combine the two and it becomes ahada ashara, 11. Basically 10 plus 1. This is also a type of tarkib, but it's not غير منصرف. The only type of tarkib that is actually غير منصرف is the tarkibul imtizaji, like the word ba'ala bakka. And how do we define it? When it's two separate random words that have no connection to each other, but they're both alam, and you combine them into one word. Does that make sense? Because if you think about it, each one of the tarkibs before this one, even before the isnad, there was some connection between the two parts. So if Zayd is standing and nobody says anything about it, that doesn't take away from the fact that Zayd is standing. So there's a connection between Zaydun qa'imun before you even put it together and you say it as a sentence. Ghulamu Zaydin has that tarkib, has that nisba, even before you talk about it. Ghulamun mujtahidun, hard work, is a quality, part of that person, even before you put it together in a sentence. Sibawayh, same thing. The noise, the sound comes because you have said this word, essentially. Ahad ashara, they're all numbers. You're adding one number to another group of numbers. Ahad ashara already has a nisbah. However, ba'alun and bakkun are two random words. One is an idol, one is the name of a king leader, and they don't have any connection to each other. They're just two separate random words that have been put together, and now they are one new word. Does that make sense? Yes, no?
Yes.
Right, so the key, so this is why it's easier if you have your cameras on. So if you just nod, I can tell, versus you having to unmute yourself, right? So this is why, again, not every type of tarkib word is going to be automatically غير منصرف. Okay, so الأمثلة الأخرى للتركيب, other examples of tarkib. فعبد الله منصرف. The word Abdullah is munsarif. Why? Because it's a tarkib of idafi, which is not qualified to be غير منصرف. ومعدي كرب. معدي كرب is غير منصرف because it is tarkib and alam, right? معدن and karibun, basically. They have the Ma'adi Karib is basically a name. This comes up in the hadith, right? There's a narrator, I think, by the name of Ma'adi Karib. But it's actually two separate words put together. Another example of idafi, another example of a tarkib, which is also not غير munsarif, is shaba qarnaha. Shaba qarnaha. This is considered to be mabni. Okay, so if you look at footnote 126 on the next page, the word shaba qarnaha actually it's a verb and a noun. And the literal meaning of it is her hair became white. Shaba qarnaha. However, this wording started to get used as a name for a certain woman whose hair had become white. So you basically call people with white hair shaba qarnaha. White-haired women, you call them shaba qarnaha. However, the word shaba qarnaha is munsarif, even though it has alam and tarkib, because the tarkib in the word, because tarkib in shaba qarnaha is not tarkib imtizaji. Rather, it is tarkib isnadi, which is the first one, musnad ilayh. Because if you remember, fi'l fa'il is also musnad ilayh, right? Just like how mubtada and khabar is musnad ilayh. So very simply put, a lot of things can look like tarkib, but when we consider it in terms of the ghayr munsarif, we only are looking at the very specific category of tarkib imtizaji, which is a cause of ghayr munsarif. All the others are not. Okay. The next one is alif noon zaidatan. Alif noon zaidatan. So there's an alif and noon at the end of the word. Ahkamul alifi wa nuni az-zaidatayn. Amma al-alif wa nunu az-zaidatani in kanata fi ismin. If alif noon is in a name, if alif noon is in an ism, فَشَرْطُهُ أَن يَكُونَ عَلَمًا. The condition of it is that it has to be a name, like the word Imran and Uthman. So the word Sa'adan, فَسَعَدَانٌ اسْمُ نَبَتٍ مُنْصَرِفٌ لِعَدَمِ الْعَلَمِيَّةِ. So the word Sa'adan, which is the name of a type of grass, اسْمُ نَبَتٍ. The word Sa'adan is the name of a type of grass. It's an ism, but it's not an alam. Okay? So this word is going to be munsarif because it's not an alam. So alif noon zaidatan is one cause, and alam is usually the second cause. Okay? Now, وَإِن كَانَتَا فِي صِفَةٍ. So alif noon, if it comes in an ism, it has to be alam. Can alif noon come in a sifa? It can come in a sifa. وَإِن كَانَتَا فِي صِفَةٍ. If alif noon comes in a sifa, فَشَرْطُهُ أَنْ لَا يَكُونَ مُؤَنَّثُهُ عَلَى صِيغَةِ فَعَلَانَةٍ. So this gets a little technical. The condition of alif noon being considered a cause of ghayr munsarif, if it comes in a sifa, is that the mu'annath form of it, the mu'annath form of this word, cannot be on the scale of fa'alanatun, because every word has a scale, it has a template that it uses. The mu'annath of this sifa word that has alif noon cannot be on the fa'alana scale. For example, the word sakaran. The word sakaran ends with alif noon, it means drunk. The word sakaran ends in alif noon and it is a sifa. Are we going to consider this as ghayr munsarif? Yes, because sakaran is, the mu'annath of sakaran is sakra, right? The mu'annath of sakaranun is sakara, and that's where we get the word وَتَرَى النَّاسِ سُكَارَى وَمَا هُمْ بِسُكَارَى. That's mu'annath, right? However, sakaranun, the mu'annath of it is not sakaranatun. That makes it, that qualifies it to be a munsarif, a ghayr munsarif word. فَنَدَمَانٌ, So a counterexample, the word nadmanun, right? The word nadmanun is munsarif liwujudi nadmanatin. The word nadman is munsarif, even though it ends in alif noon and it's a sifa, but its feminine form is nadmanatun, which is on the scale of fa'alanatun. Therefore, it's going to be considered therefore it's going to be considered munsarif and not ghayr munsarif. Make sense? Right.
Yes.
Very simple. A lot of this, came up here and there in Tuhfa, so it's not anything new. We can finish the last one, and that takes us to the first body chapter of the Ism chapter, which is Marfu'at. Okay, so the last cause of Ghayr Munsarif is Tafsilu Wazn al-Fi'li. It is when a word comes on the scale of a fi'l. أحكام وزن الفعل أما وزن الفعل فشرطه. For it to come on the scale of a fi'l and then be a cause of غير منصرف, its condition is أن يختص بالفعل, that the scale of the word is specific to a fi'l, ولا يوجد في الاسم, and it's not found in an ism, إلا منقولا عن الفعل. If it happens to be found in an ism word, then it would have been transferred over from the fi'l. Okay, so again, wazn fi'l, the first condition is that it has to be specific to a fi'l. The scale has to be specific to a fi'l and not found in an ism. And if it's found in an ism, that means it had to have come from the verbs to begin with. So for example, the word shammara and the word duriba. So the word duriba and shammala, obviously they're verbs, but the scale of these words are from the scale of these words are from af'al. Okay. وَإِن لَمْ يُخْتَصْ بِهِ. If the scales are not specific to af'al, but they are found in ism and fi'l, then فَيَجِبُ أَن يَكُونَ فِي أَوَّلِهِ إِحْدَى حُرُوفِ الْمُضَارِعِ. So if the scales happen to be specific to the fi'l and not found in the ism, or if it's found in the ism, then it's from the fi'l, then that's one category of wazn fi'l. The other category of wazn fi'l is that if the scale is shared between asma and af'al, then the condition for it to be a cause of ghayr munsarif is that the first of its letters, يجب أن يكون في أوله, the first letter has to be one of the 4 letters of mudari', alif ta ya nun, right? Alif ta ya nun, one of those letters has to be the first letter. ولا يدخله الها, and ha, i.e. ta marbuta does not enter upon the word. Like the word Ahmad. The word Ahmad is on the scale of af'al, that's a wazn fi'l, but Ahmad is also the scale of a ism, ajmal, for example. So these names that are on these patterns of Ahmad, ajmal, and so on, they are ghayr munsarif because they are alam and they are waznul fi'l. And then you also have names like Yashkur, which is not a common name, but Yashkur, for example, is a scale that is found in af'al. Taghlib, right? So for example, the famous poet Ghalib, right? Ghalib is ism fa'il, the literal scale of the word is ism fa'il. And then you have a name like Narjis, right? Narjis, which is the name of a flower, right? Again, it is very specifically in the form of it's on the pattern of a verb as well, because narjisa tadriba. Does that make sense? So if you have a scale that is shared by both asma and af'al, then you have two conditions that needs to be there so that you can use it as a cause of ghayr munsarif. Number one, the first letter of the word has to be one of the 4 letters of mudari', and number two, it cannot be accepting a ta marbuta. So the word ya'mal, for example, فَيَعْمَلٌ مُنْصَرِفٌ. The word ya'mal is munsarif liqubulha al-ha because it accepts ta marbuta. For example, naqatun ya'malatun. Because it accepts ta marbuta, we don't consider this type of word to be a ghayr munsarif cause. Okay? That's pretty much wazn fi'l. الخلاصة لبحث المنصرف وغير المنصرف. Summarization of the causes of منصرف and غير منصرف, or the discussion of منصرف and غير منصرف. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ كُلَّ مَا شُرِطَ فِيهِ الْعَالَمِيَّةِ. Know that everything in which there is a shart of alam. In other words, it has to be this plus alam. Alam has to be the second cause. They are mu'annath bitta wal ma'nawi. They are the words that are mu'annath, either with a literal ta marbuta or in meaning they are mu'annath. They are either also, they're also ujma wa tarkib wal ismu alladhi fihi al alif wa nunu al zaidatan. Ism that has alif nun extra at the end. Okay. So all of these mu'annath bitta wal ma'nawi, ujma, tarkib, ism with alif nun zaidatan, these require alam to be the second cause. These require the alam to be the second cause. أو ما لم يشترط فيه ذلك, or in which alam is not a condition. Which means what? So was, for example, was is not capable of having alam as a cause, right? وَجْتُمِعَ مَعَ سَبَبٍ وَاحِدٍ فَقَطْ, right? وَهُوَ الْعَلَمُ الْمَعْدُولُ وَوَزْنُ الْفِعْلِ. And alam also is connected to adal and wazn fi'l. Okay? So very simply, just look at the tables on page 56. So the first table is in which alam is a condition. Alam is a condition for these causes to be ghayr munsarif as well. What this simply means that if a word has mu'annath bitta but it's not alam, it's not ghayr munsarif. If it's mu'annath ma'nawi but it's not alam, then it's not ghayr munsarif. Like the word shams, for example, right? Shams is a mu'annath ma'nawi word, but it's not ghayr munsarif. Why? Because it's not alam. Does that make sense? So these 5, mu'annath bitta, mu'annath ma'nawi, ujma, tarkib, and alif nun zaidatan, all of these 5 causes need alam in order to make a word ghayr munsarif. If these words are there and you have another cause that's not alam, then it's not going to be considered ghayr munsarif. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. The second table is where alam can be a cause or something else can be a cause. So adal can have alam as the second cause or something else as the second cause, because adal can also be combined with was. Wazn fi'l can have alam or it can have something else as a potential second cause. All right. Was doesn't connect with the alam in the first place. Okay. So how many do we have here? Mu'annath bitta and muannath ma'nawi, they're part of the same cause, which is ta'neeth. So that's 1. Ujman is 2. Tarkib is 3. Alif nun za'idatan is 4. Adal is 5. Wazn fi'l is 6. So you have 6 causes. How many causes are not accounted for? 3, right? So we have 6 causes, and we need another 3 to have a total list of 9 causes of ghayr munsarif. So number 7, was not mentioned here because was doesn't combine with alam. And then you have jama' muntahal jumu', which doesn't need a second cause, right, in order to be considered ghayr munsarif. And then you have alif mamduda, alif maqsura, which also doesn't need another cause, which is again part of the ta'neeth to begin with, right? And alam itself. So you have 9 total. So of the nine, the most recurring cause of ghayr munsarif is alam, because alam must be the second cause with 5 of the causes. It could also be the potential cause for another 2. So it only doesn't come with 1, which is was. And it doesn't need to come with 2 of the causes, alif mamduda, alif maqsura, which is part of the ta'neeth, and it doesn't need to come with jama' muntahal jumu', because those 2 are considered to be 2 causes in and of themselves. Are you guys following? Like, this is just a brief recap, right? I mean, something that we did in Tuhfa. So to kind of complete this section, إِذَا نُكِّرَ صُرِفَ. غَيْرِ مُنصَرِف, in the very rare occasion, can have kasra. It can never accept tanween. غَيْرِ مُنصَرِف never accepts tanween, but on the rare occasion, غَيْرِ مُنصَرِف can accept a kasra. And what are those 2 scenarios? إِذَا نُكِّرَ صُرِفَ. When غَيْرِ مُنصَرِف is made nakira. When غير منصرف is made nakira, then it could become منصرف. So أما في القسم الأول فلبقاء الاسم بلا سبب، وأما في القسم الثاني فلبقائه على سبب واحد. Okay, so as for the first type of when a غير منصرف word, becomes munsarif, it's because it remains as an ism and it has no sabab anymore, okay? And the second way is that it accepts it being munsarif because it only has 1 sabab left. فَلِبَقَائِهِ عَلَى سَبَبٍ وَاحِدٍ. It only has 1 sabab left, because you need 2 sababs to be considered ghayr munsarif. So when you have only 1 sabab, it becomes munsarif. When you have no sabab, it becomes munsarif. So for example, جاءني طلحة, right? But you could also say وَطَلْحَةٌ آخَرٌ. طَلْحَةٌ. Talha is alam, right? Talha is alam, and Talha is ta'neeth, ta marbuta. So ja'ani talhatu, the first Talha word is ghayr munsarif. The second Talha word is not ghayr munsarif because it's accepting tanween. How is it accepting tanween? Because the word talhatun akhar is nakira. What are you saying? You're saying Talha came to me and another Talha. Who's the second Talha? Because it could be any other Talha, right? Because it's nakira, we're going to say that the second Talha word becomes munsarif. Similarly, qama Umaru wa Umarun akhar. Umar stood and another Umar stood. We don't know who's the second Umar. So it's nakira. Same way, daraba Ahmadu wa Ahmadun akhar. Ahmad hit and another Ahmad hit. We don't know who's the second Ahmad, right? وَكُلُّ مَا لَا يَنْصِرِفُ, and each مَا لَا يَنْصِرِفُ إِذَا أُضِيفَ أو دَخَلَهُ اللَّامُ فَيَدْخُلَهُ الْكَسْرَ. So the things that are no longer munsarif, or that are no longer or the things that are no longer غير munsarif are the ones that when you do idafa or you put alif lam, and as a result the kasra enters upon it. So for example, marartu bi ahmadikum, I passed by y'all's Ahmad. Basically, I passed by you all's Ahmad. So Ahmad is alam and wasn't fi'l. So you would usually say Ahmada, because you would say marartu bi Ahmada. But you could say marartu bi Ahmadikum because now it is mudaf to kum. Does that make sense? So now it is able to accept kasra. You are also able to make the same word accept a kasra when it has alif lam. Ahmad, again, marartu bil Ahmad. I passed by the Ahmad. I passed by the Ahmad. So when you say bil Ahmad, you could say bil Ahmadi because it now accepts an alif lam and therefore it's no longer considered to be غير منصرف. Make sense?
Yes.
All right. So do go over again. I reminded you guys that we're gonna focus on the matan, on the text of the book. We'll reference the footnotes here and there, but you guys should be going through the footnotes inshallah on your own time to get a better understanding and also as a review. So inshallah Monday we're going to start al-maqsad al-awwalu fil marfu'at, right? So that's where the actual details of ism mu'arab begin, right? سبحان الله بحمده سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم.